Hello there, and welcome. The greeting arrives like mist at dawn, scarcely louder than breath. He offers it gently, not as a trumpet, but as a hand on cool stone. He invites quiet, and he invites ease. Tonight he leans into a question that drifts, like a shadow across the floor of thought. Could black holes be gateways to other universes? He promises no answer, only a path that softens underfoot, where listening carries farther than certainty. Wherever listeners find themselves, daylight or darkness, he hopes they feel at home in this stillness, perhaps even to linger and subscribe to the slowness, not as a pledge, but as a pause. Now he begins. He imagines a door in the dark. It has no handle and no hinge, and yet it persists like a rumor of somewhere else. He does not press his weight against it. He stands near, the way someone might pause at the mouth of a sea cave and hear the slow breathing of interior water. A black hole, to him, resembles such a door. Not a violence alone, but an absence shaped so precisely that the mind supplies its own edges. He lingers at this brink, letting images settle like silt. He traces, without hurry, how the map of space and time responds to mass. Gravity, he remembers, is not a pull in the old sense, but a curve, a soft yielding of geometry. Near a black hole, this yielding becomes a steepness so complete that light itself leans and cannot stand. The event horizon appears as a threshold drawn by light's last possible loop. He sets this threshold beside the door in the rock, and the two images align until the mind holds them as one. He lets the thought drift further. A traveler approaches the horizon and finds that time behaves like water pooling behind a low dam. To those far away, the traveler seems to slow and never quite cross. To the traveler, time remains ordinary, and the crossing happens without ceremony. Which story is true when both are faithful to their frames? He does not decide. He watches. The question float like a feather that refuses to settle. He senses how the word gateway carries both illicit hope and disciplined doubt. Some models sketch bridges and throats. Mathematics sometimes draws a passage where matter may not safely go. Yet patience remains a teacher. Observe what is seen: the ripples of mergers, the ring of light around a distant giant, and allow imagination to move in step, not ahead. He asks whether a door may be real as a relation rather than an object, a way events connect beyond the habits of sight. He turns to origin stories. A star, after living its radiance, may collapse. The pressure that once pushed outward wanes. The core yields. The curve deepens. He watches with a calm that does not erase grief, the way a person might watch autumn leaves descend without trying to explain the tree. Collapse, in this telling, is not a failure but a transformation of what counts as location and duration. He wonders whether some transformations are so thorough that they look like disappearances. He places his palm, imaginatively, on the horizon's skin. He recalls a conjecture. Information about all that falls in may be written on that skin, a marginal script keeping the universe's strict ledger. He does not claim to read it. He simply wonders how a surface can hold a volume's worth of stories, and whether every boundary in life is also a kind of library. The metaphor quiets him. The margin becomes a patient scribe, and the whole becomes less a void than a vault. He hears the distant debate, almost like wind. Is the boundary velvet or fire, a welcoming curtain or a wall of flame? He lets both possibilities rest in the same wide room without quarrel. He understands that in physics, as in meditation, paradox is often a visitor before it departs or changes its name. The paradox says, if information cannot be lost, how can an abyss exist? The room answers only with echo. He returns to the door. If it is a threshold, does something lie beyond, or does the word beyond belong only to the side he stands on? He tastes the humility of not knowing. Yet he allows a tender speculation. Perhaps every collapse buds a region where expansion begins, a small silence that swells into a new weather of space. He does not decorate this thought with certainties. He lets it breathe like a tide pool at dusk, rich with unseen life yet almost flat. He opens his hands to scales of time that stretch past habit, the light that sketches a ring around a distant black hole leaves before his kind learns to plant grain. The ripples in space-time that arrive as a thrum in detectors begin in collisions older than the oldest stones. If a gateway exists, it is not a rush-hour gate. It measures in eras, not in minutes. He feels the comfort of that slowness washing through his chest like a low wave. He notices how Earth offers calm lessons about disappearance. Mountains rise and weather to dust. Oceans flood shelves and then recede. Deserts travel with the wind. Fossils persist, but most patterns dissolve. If a threshold leaves a sign, it may be subtle, encoded in the arrangements of what remains. He holds this not to prove a doctrine, but to keep imagination honest, as a gardener keeps a finger in the soil to gauge the water's depth. He approaches the core question once more, but softer. Could a black hole be a door? And if so, what does? The word two mean in two other universes? Two implies a journey, but perhaps the better word is into, as if a fold turns inward and opens an interior that is also elsewhere. He leaves both prepositions on the threshold like offerings, unchosen, undisturbed. He closes this beginning, as he began, with breath. He thanks, in his quiet way, the long chain of thinkers whose attention makes this wondering possible, the observers, the calculators, the builders of listening machines. He allows the feeling of standing at the mouth of the cave, the surf far inside rising and falling. The door is not forced, not even tried. He simply stands with it, and the standing itself becomes the journey's first step. He pictures light as a traveler with no luggage, moving with perfect economy through the open dark. Near a black hole, the traveler seems to wade, as if the vacuum has thickened into a slow river. The speed stays faithful, yet the path lengthens and deepens. Wavelengths stretch, notes drop, brightness thins to embers. He watches this softening with the care of someone listening for rain. Time answers with its own weather. Far from the hole, it feels like a quick stream, glittering and forgetful. Close to the event horizon, it pools, gathers, and refuses to spill. He does not imagine clocks stopping. He imagines bowls catching seconds like clear water. To distant eyes, the bowls seem always on the verge of overflowing. To falling eyes, the water slips over the rim and continues on its way. He holds these, two honest stories beside each other without insisting that one cancel the other. Geometry, he remembers, is the script that tells matter how to move and tells time how to count. Near the horizon, the script leans toward the inward flow. He stands on the metaphor's bank and imagines a line across the current, a place where the river itself runs faster than any swimmer. The event horizon is that line, no wall, no fence, only a boundary written by the water's own motion. From far away, a falling beacon appears to slow, grow faint, and redden. Each pulse takes longer to arrive. Each color shifts toward warmth, and then toward hush. He accepts the portrait, a figure lingering on the brink. He accepts, too, the companion portrait. From the beacon's own frame, the crossing feels ordinary, a simple continuation of descent. Two narratives, both faithful to their viewpoints, pass like boats at dusk and tip their lamps in courtesy. He lets the language of coordinates drift like maps unrolled on a floor. Some maps tear at the fold, new maps endure it. Names for time and space that work far away become clumsy near the threshold. Other names, kinder to the flow, take their place. A better map does not change the shore or the river. It changes the traveler's confidence. Redshift becomes, in his inner ear, a change of timbre. A bell becomes a drum, then a low wind. Photons climb out from near the horizon and spend their energy on the climb, arriving with longer waves and softer voices. He remembers the ring imaged around a supermassive black hole, a donut of patient light stitched from many eyes on Earth, evidence that a boundary is there even when the center refuses to show itself. He wonders what it means for time to gather. In human days, some hours widen the way a bay widens from a river. Waiting rooms, empty stations, doors half open. Minutes dilate and gather a hush around themselves. The body feels it. The breath slows to match. Perhaps attention is a small cousin of gravity, reshaping the felt length of an interval. He does not insist. He lets the idea sit like a stone at the bottom of clear water. He thinks of falling not as failure, but as agreement with the land's grammar. In curved space-time, free fall follows the straightest possible line, straight not by ruler, but by the fabric's own rule. A leaf follows the current, not because it is weak, but because the river's path is also the leaf's. He gives that picture to the inward drift at a horizon, where resistance loses definition and motion becomes the shape of the world. The phrase, infinite redshift, arrives with theatrical clothing, but he undresses it gently. Near the horizon, signals take so long to climb that, from afar, their rhythm stretches toward a standstill. The final flashes smear into a long fade, then into silence. If a voice could shout from the edge, distance would hear a sigh hours long. He listens for that sigh and finds instead a deeper quiet, a presence marked by what it alters in what surrounds it. He leans into the image of a stone basin set beneath a cliff. Drizzle collects, shines, and, under the right breeze, lifts as mist. Perhaps time does something similar, pooling here, thinning there, not destroyed but changing state. The question is not whether this basin overflows into a visible stream beyond the cliff. The question is whether pooling itself is a kind of invitation, a place where patterns can rest long enough to form. Jets and disks press at the edges of attention. Matter spirals in, heats, and emits, sketching luminous scrollwork around the dark center. Magnetic fields can twist this drama into slender beams that spear the night for immense distances. He stores these facts softly, like tools wrapped in cloth. The spectacle at the rim does not contradict the quiet at the core. Both belong. He remembers that distant observers are not wrong to see the freeze, and falling observers are not wrong to feel the crossing. Truth, here, is hospitable to frames. He thinks of a window on a winter morning. From inside, warmth fogs the pane. From outside, frost silvers the same glass. The pictures differ, and the difference carries information rather than error. Patience becomes a mode of measurement. Arrays listening for gravity's ripples listen for years. Dishes that assemble a ring of light must join continents and clocks, coordinating pauses into a picture. Time pools for the machines, as well as for the light they gather. He hears in that labor a kinship with the river at the horizon, a willingness to let long intervals speak, to let silence collect until a shape emerges. He holds a respectful speculation up to the light like a smoothed pebble. If time gathers at the horizon, does it thicken into a membrane where histories are written in fine script? He remembers whispers about information kept on the surface like pollen on still water. He does not claim to read the writing. He merely wonders whether the pooling is how the writing becomes legible. He ends this segment the way light ends its long climb, with a soft arrival. The traveler does not stop, the river does not cease, the bowls do not break. The door in the dark remains where it is, neither nearer nor farther. He lets his breath match the imagined current, slow, even, without argument, and rests in the idea that sometimes the most faithful description of a mystery is the calm with which one keeps company beside it. He returns to the quiet geometry, to the way the world carries itself without noise. He thinks of curvature not as a cliff but as a bowing, the soft submission of fabric to weight. A planet rests on that fabric, a star deepens it, and a collapsed core presses until the weave gathers into a throat. No stitch tears. The cloth simply follows its law. He remembers that mass and motion do not sit apart from the stage. They are the script the stage reads to know its next shape. The field equations stand like a whisper between two truths. On one side, the curving. On the other, the contents. Energy and momentum like slow thunder. He imagines the equality shining like a moonlit scale, perfectly balanced, even where the beam bends beneath its own weight. The math is not his to recite tonight. The feeling is enough. Matter tells space how to curve. Curved space tells matter how to move. He lets the equivalence principle pass a hand over the room, smoothing the cloth. In a small falling elevator, the world feels briefly free of weight. In a rocket's steady push, weight returns with a different accent. He trusts the smallness of the room to hide the difference between gravity and acceleration. Only when rooms grow large do tides betray the masquerade, stretching one side more than the other, reminding everything that curvature is not a trick but a map. Tidal forces enter like patient instructors, showing how nearby paths part or meet. He sees two beads released side by side above the horizon. As they fall, the fabric guides them toward each other radially and away from each other sideways. He recognizes this as geodesic deviation, the way the straightest lines of this world resist a classroom notion of straight. He lets the term dissolve, keeping only the image of beads and the quiet inevitability of their dance. He remembers that a static, spherical solution already contains a deep well, a place where inside begins to mean forward, where the inward direction becomes as inevitable as tomorrow. But most holes in the world are not quiet spheres. Stars spin. Gas spirals. A rotating hole drags the neighborhood with it, a slow whirlpool in the fabric. He considers the rim where space itself is compelled to turn, thinking of a wind that insists every leaf must pivot, even if only by a fraction. Frame dragging becomes to him a suggestion that space is not only bent but also braided. He sees the braids loosen into a steady twist near the throat, compelling motion to choose a spinward. Courtesy. If a traveler could hover, he knows the word is generous, there would still be a current underfoot, a conveyor of directions that refuses to pause. He does not picture conquest here, only accommodation, motion that admits the bias of the medium, and proceeds with gentleness. He sets aside fever for singularities and sits instead with horizons as ordinary boundaries wearing extraordinary meanings. He thinks of them as places where the grammar changes tense. Outside, cause and effect keep their familiar sequence. Inside, the words reorder such that moving in becomes moving onward. The geometry does not decide morals for anyone. It rearranges reach and possibility. He feels the humility of physics here, description without verdict. He lets coordinates come and go like visiting relatives. Some systems arrive and make a fuss, insisting the horizon is a cliff. Others, more courteous, put the furniture in better places so pathways remain clear. Maps that cross the threshold politely are like hosts who keep conversation flowing. He honors, instead, the gentler idea that better naming can make a hard room kind. He considers minimal surfaces, bubbles tightening to enclose the least area for a given edge. Horizons share something of that economy, not as thin glass but as a balance of outside and in. Entropy whispers in his ear with numbers he chooses not to chant. Instead, he holds the feeling that boundaries, when they are most honest, do exactly as much as required and nothing more. Elegance takes no extra breath. Curvature gives rise to tidal heating in disks and to jets that lance the long dark. He keeps one palm on the math and the other on the sky. He thinks of a ring seen around a distant, supermassive heart, a patient, embroidery made from earthly dishes and precise time. He thinks of gravity wave observatories hearing two deep wells merge into a deeper one, a final chord that fades like a bell through fog. Geometry becomes audible there, not as a formula, but as a tone. He lingers on energy conditions, those thoughtful rules about how matter must behave if the story is to stay modest. Yet even here, quantum fields murmur exceptions, borrowing in one place and repaying in another, like tides pulled through stone alcoves. The geometry listens and adjusts. The equality holds, but its meanings widen. He lets the possibility of slender throats glance through the room without demanding passports or proof. A sketch is permitted. A saga will take centuries. He folds, his attention toward the center again, and wonders what it means for a manifold to be incomplete. If paths end in finite time, does ending describe the world, or only the map's inability to continue? He accepts both readings as poems that rhyme, without agreeing. Perhaps the quiet geometry provides a soft stop, a place where the cloth bunches so tightly that threads fuse into something not yet named. Or perhaps the story continues elsewhere, with a new vocabulary and a different sense of direction. He breathes and recalls that the same equations, spread across a calm universe, produce the slow swell of cosmic expansion. Gravity can gather a star, cradle a galaxy, shape a whole, and leave between clusters a widening night. He takes comfort in this unity. The quiet geometry does not play favorites. It attends to the small stone and the supermassive core with the same patience. He ends by returning to the initial bowing of fabric, to the idea that the world is susceptible to presence. Mass arrives, and the room leans to greet it. Energy flows, and the hallway curves to accommodate its eagerness. Near a black hole, the greeting becomes a deep bow, a curtsy so low that the floor folds into itself. Whether that fold hides a passage or merely a pocket of privacy remains a question with its own slow dignity. He leaves it there, unforced, Yiddy Li. Way one leaves a door ajar to let night breathe through. He entertains the bridge imagined by quiet mathematics, a sketch that appears when the equations are extended with patience. Two exterior regions unfold from the same solution, like mirrored courtyards separated by a narrow hallway. He does not call them worlds yet. He feels instead the delicacy of a throat drawn by symmetry, a passage that is more relation than road. The image is tender and spare, a small grace hidden inside a black hole's stern profile. He senses how the extension arrives, not as a flourish, but as a commitment to completeness. Coordinates that break at the horizon are replaced by kinder names, and suddenly the geometry breathes through the pinch. On the diagram, the constriction widens into a bridge. He imagines the paper warming under a lamp, the ink deepening, the throat curving gracefully between two open infinities. A name floats up like a leaf, an Einstein-Rosen bridge. The picture is lucid and private, like a thought one hesitates to say aloud. He sits with the fact that this classical throat is shy. It refuses traffic. The passage pinches too quickly, its own gravity cinching it shut before any traveler can cross. Signals falter. World lines end where they hoped to continue. He feels no anger at the refusal. He hears in the bridge's shyness a kind of boundary politeness. This door opens only as a drawing, not as a corridor. He allows that even a non-traversable connection is still a connection, an idea wrapping two exteriors into a single gown. He holds the phrase, other universe, lightly. The extension offers a second exterior, but whether it deserves the word, other, depends on what one is prepared to call a universe. If a universe is a region where observers can make a long life of measurements without falling in, the mirrored courtyard qualifies. If a universe is everything that is, then a mirror is still a room in the same house. He prefers not to settle the vocabulary. He lets the question rest on the bridge like dew on a rail. He follows calmly, the later line of wondering. Can a throat be held open? Could a bridge be made hospitable, not just sketched? He hears about forms of matter that behave against habit, pressures that push outward, energies that swing negative in a narrow sense, quantum arrangements that borrow and repay. He does not force the details. He knows that in some treatments, exotic stresses could brace a passage the way a lattice holds a tunnel. But he knows, too, that bracing is expensive and that nature keeps strict ledgers. Quantum inequalities arrive like soft-voiced auditors, reminding every borrowing of its limit and every brace of its required cost. He lets thought drift to a Casimir slit, to plates so close that the vacuum's flutter becomes lopsided, to energies, counted relative to an elsewhere. He wonders if such small tricks of emptiness hint at larger architectures, or if scale humbles ambition. He does not rush to the ladder that climbs from laboratory gaps to cosmic bridges. He stands on the lowest rung and feels the wood. He allows a different rumor to breathe, that entanglement and geometry may share a secret handshake. If two quanta know each other in the intimate way that distance cannot break, perhaps their knowing is a thread, and many threads braided might resemble a throat. He holds the suggestion, ER meeting EPR like acquaintances nodding across a quiet room. He does not insist the nod becomes a handshake, or the handshake a door. He is content with the thought that connection may be the fabric's first principle, and that space might be what large-scale connection looks like when it relaxes. He pictures a topological censorship as the room's chaperone, a theorem murmuring that, under broad and modest conditions, shortcuts stay hidden from honest travelers. The world protects causality's gentle dignity, he thinks, the way a forest protects its seedlings with dappled shade. Bridges can exist in principle, but exposed, traversable ones demand difficult arrangements, rare ingredients, or never quite rise into daylight. He lets the chaperone's presence ease impatience. Patience is its own path across a hard landscape. He returns to the Penrose portrait, to origami diagrams where whole lives fold into diamonds and triangles. In that, simplified. Grammar, a bridge is a neat stitch between two panels. He follows a curve with his finger and finds that, for a classical throat, every time-like trail from one courtyard toward the other is cut by a pinch that tightens before arrival. Light can glance through for an instant in certain stories only, to find the fabric closing behind it. The gesture is elegant, even as it declines a visit. He feels how quickly one could harden this into a verdict and resists. Instead, he breathes through the softer possibility. A non-traversable bridge may still be a clue. Perhaps the cosmos loves connection but protects it with modesty. Perhaps what resembles a corridor is, in truth, a gentle identification. This here is paired with that there, and the pairing matters in ways that never submit to walking. He thinks of notes struck in unison on distant strings, their kinship audible though no bow travels the gap. He lets his attention drift toward more speculative gardens, where inflation expands like a held breath, and small buds of space-time may pinch off beyond a throat. A collapsing star could seed an elsewhere that grows its own sky. He walks along this hedge without entering. He notices the care good gardeners take with fences, not to exclude wonder, but to keep it from trampling. Seedlings with haste. He smiles at the thought that even speculation needs shade. He acknowledges how gravity can become a paradox nearly on command. Hold information sacred, and horizons grow restless. Demand traversability, and the price arrives with many zeros. Ask for time travel, and the room clears its throat. He senses the affection with which some physicists frame prudence as protection, as if the universe keeps a quiet promise not to betray causality with spectacle. He appreciates the promise even while he stands politely at the imagined bridge, and listens for another promise in return. He imagines, briefly, the traveler who does not exist, because this telling admits no characters. He imagines, nevertheless, a path that feels like sympathy rather than transport, a kinship of regions rather than a commute. If a bridge cannot be crossed, perhaps it can be understood as a poem the geometry writes to itself, a sonnet on the theme of elsewhere. He hears the closing couplet rhyme without closure. He contemplates the way arguments about energy conditions have softened under quantum weather. Classical rules laid firm bounds on what matter might do. Quantum fields, fluctuating, like reeds in wind, respect those bounds on average locally with whispers of exception. He does not inflate these whispers into promises. He simply recognizes that softness in law can be the beginning of grace, though not always its guarantee. He stands finally in the presence of the bridge as a meditative object. It reminds him that connection can be real without being usable, known without being touched, pictured without being traversed. The imagined throat joins two exteriors in the same equation. The imagination joins humility with curiosity in the same breath. The door in the dark does not open tonight, but it does not vanish either. It remains as a contour in thought, a way of noticing that the universe might carry more relations than roads. He lets the image fade as a tide withdraws from smooth sand, leaving a faint seam that catches the last light. If a gateway exists, perhaps it resembles this, a form that invites attention rather than passage, a shape that says here and elsewhere in the same soft voice. He accepts the invitation by listening, and the listening feels enough. He turns to the patient star, to the long apprenticeship of light that prepares its quiet surrender. A cloud cools for ages, folds under its own soft insistence, and kindles where density welcomes chance. Fusion begins like a murmured pact among nuclei, small agreements becoming warmth. He feels the steadiness of this work, hydrogen becoming helium, helium becoming carbon and oxygen, shells nested like rings in a tree. The star learns to carry itself by balancing two courtesies, outward pressure from fire, inward gentleness from gravity, each answering the other so perfectly that the whole shines without effort in any one moment, though the effort across. Time is immense. He counts, not with numbers but with seasons. In modest suns, the first step lasts billions of years. In larger stars, hunger accelerates and youth burns quickly. The core grows ash, and the ash becomes fuel. New shells ignite and smolder in orderly impatience. Somewhere in this ladder lies iron, and iron keeps its heat like a miser. He remembers that binding energy peaks there. To fuse farther is to spend more than one earns. The ledger turns red. The outward push hesitates, and hesitation in a star is a kind of truth-telling. He watches the pause before collapse the way. One watches the breath held just before a swimmer turns at the wall. In a heartbeat by stellar standards, the core loses its resistance. Electrons are pressed into protons. Neutrinos stream outward in a flood that scarcely touches anything. The inner world falls through itself. He does not dramatize the speed. He only recognizes that the star, patient for eons, becomes decisive in a blink, as if the geometry beneath it asks for an answer now. He stands beside the two fates that follow. In one, the collapse checks at nuclear density. A shock forms and fights outward through rain of infalling matter. The envelope departs as a supernova, and a neutron star rests where a sun once sang. In the other, mass and momentum insist beyond that limit. Even the pressure of tightly packed neutrons cannot argue forever. The core continues inward until no signal can claim an outward direction. A black hole forms, not as a declaration, but as a hush that spreads from the center like ink in water, darkening with perfect calm. He keeps the thresholds nearby like smooth stones in a pocket, turning them without reciting their measures. There is a weight a white dwarf can bear before the lattice of electrons must yield. There is a heavier weight a neutron star can bear before even that stern stiffness bows. He lets the numbers remain in the background like stars seen from the corner of the eye, content to feel their guidance without carving them into the room. Limits become characters of a different kind here, not forbidding voices, but gentle reminders of how far patience can stretch before it changes name. Rotation adds a quiet complication. A Born spin widens into a disk. Magnetic fields thread the churning and may draw a pair of narrow jets from near the newborn horizon. He thinks of these jets as quills writing in the dusk, lines that can stretch for light years, announcing in the gentlest thunder that a core has folded into night. Sometimes gamma rays arrive as brief, hard syllables, a collapser speaking without grammar, and distant instruments translate that urgency into minutes and seconds. Even thunder can be delicate when heard across a universe. He follows another corridor of thought to the early universe, where metal-poor giants may have fallen straight into darkness with little ceremony, planting heavy seeds for the supermassive hearts later found in galaxy centers. He entertains the idea that some black holes are ancient trees grown quickly, not from patient accretion alone, but from direct collapse when the night was young. He lets the suggestion sit in the quiet, neither proven nor dismissed, like a fossil half seen in a cliff, clear enough to shape the imagination, shy enough to keep it honest. He returns to the present star, the patient one, and considers whether a dying core can become a cradle rather than a tomb. If a new region of space-time buds within, not as a road for travelers but as an elsewhere with its own sky, then death here is birth there. He does not claim the bud, he traces only the possibility in the same breath that traced the bridge. If such budding occurs, the midwife is gravity itself, folding the cloth so tightly that the underside touches and then perhaps parts into a new expanse. A seed does not announce its opening. It simply yields to the right pressure in the dark. He feels the tenderness of that question and refuses to harden it into a proclamation. He respects the stories that remain outside, rings of light, jets, afterglows. Those are the signatures readable on this side of the door. He also respects the silence that follows the formation of a horizon, a silence that could be simple privacy or subtle creation. He asks whether creation always needs noise. Many births happen in water, in dim rooms, attended by breath. Perhaps the cosmos keeps similar rooms. He imagines the last moments before the hush spreads. Infalling layers rain through the forming disk. Some fraction rebounds. Some returns as wind. Some disappears from accounting with a calm that appears abrupt, only because our measures cannot follow. Neutrinos pass through like messengers in a crowded market, scarcely touching anything yet telling the story by their number and their timing. He lets the messengers go and keeps a quiet gratitude for their evidence, the way one keeps a pebble from a long walk because the weight feels right in the palm. He remembers that not all endings blast. Some stars fold without fireworks, their outer layers slipping inward without a dramatic farewell. He thinks of direct collapse as a bow taken with the curtain already falling. No one on the far balconies knows for certain what was played in, the final bars. He holds space for that gentler ending as one more way the cosmos practices silence, different not in substance, perhaps, but in tone. He turns the question of angular momentum in his hands like a wooden ring. Spin can rescue a portion of matter from immediate loss, can light a transient disk where fragments find new orbits, can power a collimated cry into interstellar dark. Yet spin also complicates the inward path, shaping the newborn horizon and the ergo region around a rotating heart. He does not catalog the regions. He simply feels the way motion writes not only where, but how the fold occurs, as if the handwriting of collapse leaves a style for the night to remember. He pauses by the memory that gravity waves, ripples in, the fabric, have been heard when two such hearts meet later in their long night. Those signals carry the measure of mass and spin, the gentle arithmetic of merging wells. Somewhere in those data, he imagines, lies a record of earlier lives, the patient stars that first collapsed, the clusters that shepherded them, the galaxies that gave them room to age. Listening to a merger is, in a sense, listening to the ancestry of darkness, music written by long histories into a single fading chord. He lets himself ask, barely above a whisper of thought, if a star's end can be a gate for information to be written on a horizon. Could it also be a beginning elsewhere? A cradle for expansion? He does not chase the thought. He sets it next to the image of a seed in winter, indistinguishable from a pebble until warmth returns. The seed does not promise, it persists. Perhaps persistence is itself a form of promise that does not presume fulfillment, a patient yes without a schedule. He closes with the star as he began, with patience. A lifetime of balancing, a brief decision, and then a calm that changes the neighborhood for eons. The black hole is not a trophy, but a posture the fabric assumes, a posture that might host new stories beyond our hearing. He bows inwardly to the star's long apprenticeship and to the question it leaves behind. What, in the deepest sense, does it become when it becomes so quiet? He considers the horizon as a margin, a thin place where the universe might keep its notes. The idea arrives like a moth at a window, soft, improbable, insistent. If all that falls inward is not forgotten, then perhaps the boundary itself remembers, not as a stack of pages but as an arrangement of minute markings, tiny tiles of possibility, each no bigger than the smallest length the fabric will admit. He does not try to count the tiles. He simply holds the feeling that a surface, not a volume, bears the weight of a world's memory, and that this reversal is less a trick than a clue. He thinks of a librarian who writes only on the edges of pages, yet somehow encodes the whole story there, a ledger that grows not thicker but wider. A black hole's entropy, he recalls the word as a measure of how many ways the hidden can be arranged, seems to scale with area. The surface is the scribe. The interior is merely what the scribe refers to. He lets that inversion rest, a small stone on the tongue of thought, surprising and cool. He notices how warmth finds a way into this story. A horizon, in a subtle sense, possesses a temperature. It hums with the faintest thermal possibility. A body that tries to hover near the edge feels a bath of particles as if the vacuum itself has grown restless. Inwardly, he understands this as the fabric's way of reconciling grace with accounting. If a whole can have heat, it can have the kind of disorder that heat measures. If it can have disorder, it can have memory. The language of thermodynamics, born to describe steam and ice and iron, finds a soft echo here, where geometry breathes. He holds the whisper that a black hole glows, extremely faintly, as if edges cannot help but radiate the news of what they are. The glow is not a lantern. It is a slow exhalation, a patient leaking of energy that could take longer than stars have to age. He is not in a hurry, and neither is the whole. What matters in this quiet is the suggestion that the horizon does not keep its secrets forever. It tells them in a code that the universe may be designed to understand. He lets the code be entanglement, that quiet affinity by which two quanta share a single sentence even when no space connects their halves. The vacuum itself is rife with such pairings, births that occur in matched opposites. Near a horizon, he imagines one partner drifting outward while the other falls in, the pair still speaking to each other across the threshold. Information, in this picture, may be less about particles carrying messages than about relationships surviving, a web of correspondences spanning the edge like dew on a wire fence at dawn. He remembers that some minds propose a deeper weaving, that the interior is built from these relationships, that space itself crystallizes out of patterns of correlation. If so, the surface, thick with relational structure, could be sufficient to recover the inside. He does not pronounce it true. He offers it the respect one gives to a carefully crafted bowl that may or may not hold water. He enjoys the curve. Of it, nonetheless, an economy that promises the whole from the border alone. He thinks of the holographic as a metaphor that behaves like a bridge. In a hologram, a flat plate contains a scene in depth. Each small region holds the entire image in some soft, scattered way. He does not press the metaphor beyond its kindness. He uses it to feel the oddness of a law where more space does not mean more memory, only more edge. A vast sphere can hold no more register of arrangements than its boundary will allow. The center can be spacious as silence. The circumference keeps the count. He remembers, faintly, a story in which a full-bodied world of gravity and fields is mirrored by a leaner tail painted on its edge without gravity at all. The interior's curves correspond to patterns on the border, like a symphony replayed as a line of careful script. He does not require the stage or the exact repertoire. He keeps only the possibility that the margin suffices, that the bulk is a generous rephrasing. If so, a black hole becomes not a deletion, but a compression, a relentless editor who keeps every letter and discards only the redundant spacing. He wonders what it means for meaning to be preserved when forms change utterly. If fate inside is to be stripped of names, rock, light, whisper, does the surface keep the names or only the grammar by which they mattered? He suspects the latter. He suspects the horizon holds patterns of connection, not the flavor of the things connected. Memory as wiring diagram, not as portrait. He is not disappointed by this. He thinks of his own days remembered less as photographs than as the way certain hours touched and lifted others. He lets the paradox step into the room like a guest with damp sleeves. If the horizon writes everything, how does it maintain the privacy of an inside that, for some observers, still exists? If the edge radiates, how do the words keep their coherence as they scatter? He hears, from a distance, debates about fire and smoothness, about whether the threshold must sear to protect the ledger, about how the script can be read without burning the paper. He refuses to become agitated. He trusts that a problem sharpened, so precisely may be an invitation for new language rather than a stalemate. He returns to the idea of counting with tiles. There is a smallest unit he will allow, a minimal patch of surface. No cloth can be cut thinner than that without becoming some other thing. The number of patches is the measure of the whole's possible stories. He looks at the night sky and sees galaxies as glyphs, each with a central character written in area. He sees the universe as a long book of margins, where edges shine with compressed tails. He considers how this edge writing could reconcile with the persistent faith that evolution, even inside a black hole, preserves unitarity, a word that in his mouth becomes a vow not to dissipate meaning. Perhaps, he thinks, the world never forgets. It only translates. What falls is translated into boundary script. What the boundary gives back, slowly, is translated into other letters carried away as faint heat. Translation is not erasure, but neither is it a simple mirror. Something is lost in immediacy and gained in generality, as when a poem moves into another language and becomes plainer, yet carries its rhythm like a heart. He imagines attention itself as a kind of surface. The mind's margin encodes the interior's weather. A quiet breath at the edge tells of storms deep within or the absence thereof. To attend to the boundary, of a person, of a phenomenon, is to read the perimeter for signs of a center. He does not moralize the analogy. He lets it sit beside the physics like two vessels on the same shelf, separate but glinting with the same light. He notes that if area measures memory, then growth of the horizon measures the welcome given to new. Stories. When matter and light fall in, the circumference swells. The scribe makes room on the margin. When radiation carries energy away, the belt line trims by amounts so tiny that patience becomes the only competent witness. The edge breathes in and, over ages beyond counting, breathes out. Breathing is a better word than burning here, though. Both exist in truth, a slow respiration of knowing. He takes comfort from the restraint of this vision. There is no boastful staircase to elsewhere, only a careful ledger on a thin skin. If gateways exist, they do not need to advertise. The holographic. Margin has its own humility, to be enough without appearing to be much. He feels in that humility a kind of ethics, a reminder that what seems superficial may hold the deep. He wonders, finally, how a surface might hold the weight of a world within its script. Perhaps weight is the wrong measure. Perhaps it is all. Circulation, edge to center to edge again, like the ocean's cycle of mist, cloud, rain, and river. Nothing is lost. Forms turn. Patterns persist. The horizon stands as the place where turning becomes visible, the silver line on a dark sea where moonlight catches every small wave and writes, in an alphabet of glints, the story of the depth. Beneath. He leaves the margin as he found it. Quiet, patient, nothing like a spectacle, and yet the keeper of so much. If black holes are gates, perhaps the first gate is this recognition that the edge is enough to remember the whole. He steps back from the window and lets the moth continue its small tapping, a creature of night reminding him that sometimes the thinnest boundary, the pain, the skin, the horizon, is where the richest conversation happens. He lingers with the long memory, a hush that refuses to be empty. The paradox waits here like a tide that meets itself, asking whether the sea can ever forget its waves. On one shore stands the vow of unitarity, a quiet axiom that says the world keeps faith with its beginnings. On the other shore stands the horizon's soft erasure, the way it seems to swallow particulars and return only warmth. He does not force the shores to touch. He listens to the surf. He considers how the radiation from a black hole looks. At first, glance like ordinary heat, a whisper of particles without lineage, a fog that reveals nothing of the faces that fell in. If the glow is simply thermal, the story of what crossed the threshold would fade into sameness, as if a library's shelves were burned and only smoke remained. Yet the universe has a reputation for thrift. He trusts the stinginess that refuses to pay with memory. He takes up the image of a ledger again, this time with pages that begin blank and slowly darken as the horizon exhales. Early on, the script looks random, like ash drifting without pattern. As time goes on, correlations may thicken, faint as threads beneath cloth. He imagines a curve, the kind that rises, peaks, and falls, measuring how much secrecy remains inside compared to how much has escaped. The peak arrives when the whole is half spent, a quiet turning point when the outward breath begins to carry more of the old story than the inward silence keeps. He pictures the horizon as an accomplished mixer. What enters becomes entangled with what already dwells there, and what dwells there is entangled with the fields that rest just outside, ready to become outgoing glow. The horizon does not shred meaning. It scrambles it. Scrambling is not cruelty. It is the art by which a message becomes indistinguishable from weather until time and patient listening assemble the pattern again. He trusts that art more than he trusts dramatic endings. He briefly entertains the thought of hair, features too subtle to mock the old no-hair simplicity, yet delicate enough to carry hints of what has fallen. Perhaps the horizon keeps soft imprints, ripples that linger like breath on glass, telling not names but relations. He does not anchor the hope there, but he allows it to be one of the ways memory might cling without breaking the humility of the edge. He stands beside another gentleness, complementarity, the idea that different observers keep equally true stories that cannot be woven into a single picture without tearing the canvas. From far away, information leaks out encoded in the slow glow. From close in, a crossing remains smooth, unremarkable, absent of fire. Both accounts breathe in their own rooms. Trying to merge them produces heat not of physics, but of impatience. He prefers to let each room be complete in its way, doors closed, lights low. He hears the murmur of a harsher proposal, that the edge must blaze to protect the ledger, that smoothness at the threshold would allow contradictions that the universe refuses. He does not embrace the blaze or the smoothness. He holds both as poems trying to describe the same fog. He suspects the fog remains foggy because the mind keeps asking for a single canvas when the world may be offering layered vellum, each sheet truthful and thin. He remembers how chaos, in the gentle sense, accelerates the loss of trackable detail while preserving the possibility of recovery for those with unreasonably careful measurements. A black hole becomes, in this view, the fastest scrambler allowed, a kind of master chef of correlations, folding flavors so thoroughly that only time and a precise palate could reconstruct the recipe. The palate may be forever beyond mortal reach, but the recipe is not lost. It is written into the ensemble of steam rising from the pot. He lets a playful tug of thought pass through. Perhaps throwing a small pattern into an old black hole allows that pattern to reappear surprisingly, soon in the outgoing glow, not as a portrait, but as a secret rhyme. The rhyme is useless to a casual ear. It reveals itself only to a listener who already knows most of the song. He does not ask who such a listener could be. He simply delights in the notion that recovery is a social act between the present and its near future, between what remains and what departs. He turns away from cleverness and back to patience. If information returns, it may do so by being distributed so finely that no single particle carries meaning. Only the entanglement among many carries it. Meaning becomes a pattern of relationships, like constellations traced not by bright stars alone, but by their distances and angles. To read the message is to hold many points at once in a gentle attention. He accepts that such reading belongs to the universe itself, not to the small creatures within it who carry finite clocks. He notices how the paradox softens when one refuses to treat the horizon as a singular place. The neighborhood becomes a weave of near and far modes, partners that exchange identity as the geometry flows. What seems to be a local process can be global in its bookkeeping. He appreciates the discipline of that word, bookkeeping, applied to night and heat. The cosmos keeps accounts in the currency of correlation. Debits and credits balance, even when the ledger is written on mist. He asks, in a voice nearly too quiet to hear, what it means for memory to be real if no one can reconstruct it. He remembers that forests store the history of rain in the width of rings, even if no eye measures them. Reality does not require an auditor. It requires coherence. If the glow coheres with the vow of unitarity, then it preserves the possible reconstruction, and that possibility is enough for truth even if no hand ever performs it. He imagines the interior not as a sack of secrets, but as a region whose secrets are shared with the outside in a way that challenges ordinary geography. The inside and outside may be less two regions than two ways of tracing the same network of relations. He does not insist on this. He only breathes with the relief it offers, the way a knot can be untied not by pulling harder but by learning a different perspective on the rope. He lets the notion of islands, small sanctuaries where entropy counts, change meaning, wander into the room like shy birds. Perhaps, to predict the amount of hiddenness at late times, one must include a sliver of space behind the horizon as if it were already part of the outside's accounting. The idea feels like a kindness granted by the geometry, a recognition that boundaries can migrate depending on what question is being asked. He neither celebrates nor denies it. He simply enjoys the reminder that borders are not always rigid walls. Sometimes they are tides. He returns to the simplest phrasing, the universe may never forget. Forgetting, in this telling, is misnaming. Translation. What goes in is rewritten. What comes out is a palimpsest. He strokes the word palimpsest the way one might trace an old carving with a fingertip, feeling the new letters riding over faint older grooves. He wonders if every conservation law is, at heart, a promise that the palimpsest will remain legible to the world that inscribed it, even if not to the smaller beings who shade their eyes and squint. He pictures, finally, a long evening by a quiet sea. Waves erase footprints and leave the sand smooth, yet the water that remains holds salts and temperatures, microcurrents and swirls that encode the story of what walked and where. Only a god of currents could tell the tale, but the tale exists. He suspects black holes practice a similar gentleness, erasing appearances while keeping relations, smoothing the surface while thickening the sea beneath it with traces. The long memory persists, not as a diary of nouns, but as a grammar of connections. He lets the paradox depart as it arrived, without a quarrel. The room keeps its dimness. The ledger keeps its entries. The glow keeps its patience. If a black hole is a gate, perhaps it is first a gate for memory from one language into another, from local portrait to global relation, from obvious shapes to delicate correspondences. He does not ask for more tonight. He is content to stand near the surf of thought and listen to how the waves keep their count by breaking softly, one after another, never the same, never lost. He stands before the question that refuses a single costume. At the boundary, is the fabric a velvet curtain that parts without a seam, or a sudden flame that protects the ledger with fierce heat? He holds both images lightly, one in each hand, and lets their weight advise rather than decide. The difference matters. A smooth crossing keeps faith with the gentle lessons of falling rooms, while a searing threshold honors the strict grammar of quantum entanglement. He listens to both tutors as if they are instruments in the same slow orchestra. He remembers the modest promise made by small elevators and freely falling stones. Near any point, gravity can be kindly, indistinguishable from weightlessness if the room is small. No drama, a whisper says, as if the horizon is merely another patch of sky passed in silence. Smoothness is a form of courtesy the universe extends to local travelers. He respects that courtesy. He hears in it the echo of a deep principle. The laws are local. They do not spring traps laid by faraway bookkeeping. But quantum relations are not entirely local. Entanglement reaches like mycelium, threading soils that seem separate. The faint glow near the horizon, the slow thermal breath, borrows its shape from pairs born together. One partner falls, the other wanders outward. If the outward wanderer must, by later necessity, share stronger ties with the earlier fog already emitted, a subtle jealousy arises. Entanglement dislikes divided loyalties. It keeps a strict monogamy. A small system cannot be maximally intimate with two partners at once without fraying the story that claims coherence. Here the paradox blooms like a moonflower at dusk. To keep smoothness at the edge, inside and just outside must hold a tight bond, the gentle handshake that makes a crossing feel ordinary. To keep faithful accounting for the outward breath, the fresh glow must pledge intimacy to the older radiance, already far away. Both vows cannot be maximal. Something must yield. The edge's smoothness, or the promise that the escaping fog carries the whole past in woven code. Fire is one proposed price, an energetic veil that breaks the inside-outside. Bond and freeze the glow to love what has already left. Velvet is the other price, keeping the handshake unbroken and asking the universe to hide its bookkeeping in some subtler reach of relation. He refuses to take sides with heat or with velvet. He attends to the logic like a gardener who waters. Both beds and watches what sprouts. If the curtain burns, the small falling room loses its quiet trust, and the equivalence principle limps. If the curtain stays velvet, the book of outside correlations risks a contradiction at the page where late rhyme must know early verse. The universe, he suspects, does not relish contradictions. It favors translations. He lets softer resolutions drift in like fog through a grove. Perhaps the degrees of freedom that seem separate are, at a deeper level, identified. Two names for one set of relations, like a river known by different titles along its length. Then the jealousy relaxes. The same bond is seen from two seats, not two distinct bonds competing for fidelity. Complementarity hums again here. What looks like duplication to a God's Eye catalog may be a single story told in two languages, never spoken in the same room. He invites another whisper. The outside's accounting might expand to include tiny sanctuaries that, by a careful rule, count as part of the exterior when predicting how much remains hidden. The would-be breach in vows is healed by a migration of the border, as if the coastline slides to keep the sea's promise. The edge, then, need not blaze. The ledger balances by reassigning territories in the map of correlations. He feels the practicality of this move and the humility of accepting that boundaries can be questions rather than walls. He imagines horizon microstructure as a woven fabric with knots that tighten under strain. From afar, the cloth looks smooth. Up close, it reveals a grain that can carry subtle imprints without tearing. Crossing such a weave remains uneventful at the scale of a person, yet the pattern is lively enough to encode and to exchange with the outward breath. In this mood, the curtain is velvet in touch and iron in resolve, preserving both gentleness and accounting. He considers acceleration's bath, the warm haze that greets anyone who insists on hovering. For the hovering observer, the edge is already energetic, a place where the vacuum froths. Fire, in this telling, is a matter of insisting on a hard stance against the river rather than drifting with it. The falling room feels only the river's. Calm. The hovering platform feels the spray. The distinction is not deception. It is frame. He finds comfort there. The world may be merciful to those who accept its flow and stern to those who resist it, without any inconsistency in the water. He pictures a stretched surface, a membrane placed just outside the true horizon, endowed with conductivity, viscosity, and other worldly habits. This imaginary skin can absorb, process, and release, standing in for the inscrutable depths while remaining loyal to outside causal order. He does not mistake the proxy for the thing. He values the way such fictions translate abyss into engineering. The membrane becomes a teaching tool, a way to let the edge behave like a patient machine rather than a blank refusal. He sets these architectures beside the rigor of jealousy and watches them breathe together. Some truths here may be conditional. This smoothness holds if that identification is accepted. This heat appears if those bonds are regarded as distinct. He trusts contingencies more than he trusts absolutes in such a delicate landscape. The night prefers conditionals. They shimmer and leave room for air. He admits, with a softness that feels like dusk, that emphatic phrases may be the marks of incomplete language. A firewall is a clean, memorable word. So is no drama. Clean words arrive early. Nuanced sentences take their time. Perhaps the final description, if one is ever given, speaks of relations that are not neatly inside or outside, of surfaces that are everywhere once thought is measured, of heat that is welcomed by some paths and not by others. He is content to let maturity replace proclamation. He wonders what ethics arise from these pictures. At a threshold where curiosity might insist, on approach humility counsels attention to the frame. Some frames demand a price, noise, heat, distortion, while others are invited by the geometry to pass in silence. He imagines research itself as a choice of frame, stand and strain against the flow, harvesting spray, or fall with the current, and let patterns reveal themselves by their own timing. Neither choice is wrong. Each learns a different thing, and both are needed to keep the conversation honest. He lets the two images return, the velvet curtain and the narrow fire, and allows them to coexist like constellations traced from the same stars. One picture serves local calm, the other protects global vows. Whether the universe chooses one, garment, or many may depend on the intimacy of scale, on what counts as distinct in the deepest grammar. He does not insist on wardrobe. He praises the tailoring. He closes this meditation with a breath that matches his earlier pace. The horizon remains a threshold of manners as much as of metrics, a place where the world balances hospitality with law. If a gate exists, it does not swing on hinges of spectacle. It hangs instead on the nearly invisible pins of relation, respect, and translation. Velvet or fire, or some kinder fabric not yet named, the edge keeps its poise. He stands a little while longer, not to solve, but to appreciate that even a paradox can be a form of grace when it is patient, and when attention is patient with it. He hears, in the quiet between ripples, a rumor of small beginnings. Baby universes whisper, the way seeds whisper under snow, the way spores ride in air that looks empty. The whisper does not promise travelers or maps. It speaks instead of budding, a fold pressed so closely upon itself that, beyond a certain tenderness, the cloth parts and a new stretch of fabric opens, unobserved from the old. He lets the image settle like pollen on water and asks nothing of it but patience. He imagines collapse not as a terminal period but as a comma, a soft pause where grammar changes mood. A core yields, the tide of curvature rises, and near the deepest pinch the classical script runs out of ink. He wonders whether quantum letters, small, jittering, reluctant to commit to single shapes, pick up the line. If the letters change the ending, they might replace a hard stop with a soft opening, a bounce or a budding, a quiet detour into an elsewhere that shares no mutual horizon with the parent. He keeps the conjecture unembellished, like a bowl set, on a table in a dim room. He touches, with 2 fingers of thought, the practice of tunneling. In ordinary fields, the world sometimes slips through a barrier it cannot climb, appearing on the far side without having visited the top. The path is unlikely, but the improbable is not the forbidden. It is the slow. He asks if space-time itself can tunnel, if a tightly crushed region might cicatrize and bud, the way pressure in geology can open a fault that becomes its own basin. He does not require a diagram. He allows only the idea that elsewhere could be a lawful continuation without being a visible extension. He thinks of eggs and membranes. Every embryo grows within a boundary that both guards and feeds. A horizon, in this mood, resembles a shell, not to be pierced from outside, but to be worked within until the inside has its own sky. The shell breaks at last from the inside only, a one-way declaration of new air. If a baby universe opens, it opens into itself. He smiles at the quiet logic. Cosmic censorship becomes midwifery. Whatever happens in the dark is kept from spectacle, even if it is the gentlest spectacle of all, birth. He lets inflation hover at the edge of thought, not yet as an engine, but as a rumor of breath. A small, high-pressure patch might, under the right equation of state, swell faster than neighbors can answer. If such a patch germinates in the deep interior of a collapse, its swelling could turn inward directions into outward expansion, the way a stitched pocket becomes an entire lining when pulled right side out. He does not chase the mechanism. He respects the outline alone, a little region that chooses width over depth. He recalls that some sketches describe a pinch-off, a last narrow isthmus severed by the world's own rules so that conservation and causality remain tidy on the parent side. The child then carries its own accounts, begins its own ledgers, sets its own horizon rules. He considers how this saves the modesty of the first world. Nothing escapes, nothing returns. The ledger balances without the confusion of exchange rates across universes. The bud keeps its privacy the way a daughter keeps her name in a distant valley, kin yet independent. He entertains the counterweight, how topology is reluctant to change, how theorems raise an eyebrow at passages that create new handles visible to those far away. But buds that remain hidden need not offend such cautions. If all surgery occurs behind a horizon, the exterior never notices a hole in its own grammar. The parent's sky stays whole. The bud's sky begins. He favors this discretion. The cosmos, when it makes large moves, often prefers curtains and quiet stages. He wonders how law behaves across such a divide. If constants vary in the bud, if the child breathes with a slightly different rhythm of forces and masses, does the parent's collapse select for fecundity the way forests select for seeds that travel well? He does not trade in verdicts. He lets the question sit like a smooth pebble among others. Do universes beget universes, not as a grand plan but as a habit of the fabric when pressed? And if so, does the family resemble itself across generations, or do small variations proliferate like accents in language? He imagines white holes, the time reverse of inward hush, as possible boundary conditions in the child's youth. A fountain, where the parent remembered a sink. He does not summon fountains into the parent's sky. He keeps the behavior confined to the new world with its own arrow of time. In one telling, the interior's compressed state reappears as an initial exhalation, an outward push that looks from within like a beginning. Every beginning in this mood is also an end seen from elsewhere. He lets the symmetry soften his breath. He respects the costs whispered by prudence. To bud, the collapsing region might need ingredients the ordinary star does not provide. Peculiar stresses, rare arrangements, quantum states tuned with exquisite patience. The improbable is not excluded. It is merely expensive in the currency of conditions. He honors that economy. Even if buds are possible, they may be uncommon as pearls, requiring grit in just the right place for just the right time, then wrapping it slowly until luster appears. He visits the ethical echo the image carries into human rooms. If new worlds bud from endings, then endings carry a tenderness that outlasts loss. A life can be apparent to forms it never meets. He refuses to preach. He only notices the soft consolation in the metaphor, the idea that what collapses here could support beginning elsewhere, that departure can coincide with arrival in a different grammar of place. He does not forget the parent's side, where observations remain the final authority. Rings of light, jets like writing, waves in space-time that fade like bells, these are the signatures on this shore. The whisper of baby universes is not a measurement. It is the mind's way of staying open where the data are silent. He keeps the discipline that separates whisper from report, intuition from chart, while still allowing the whisper to keep him company. Wonder is not an enemy of rigor. It is rigor's older sibling, who taught it to walk. He allows a brief thought about ancestry. If buds are many, perhaps some children are more likely to sprout further children, not through will, but through parameters. A line of universes might then explore a space of possibilities the way a tree explores the sky with branches. He smiles at the tree, not as a proof, but as an image of patience. Each branch thickens where it succeeded in finding light. Each twig is a risk taken, and most air ends unoccupied. The whole remains graceful. He asks one small, precise question and leaves it unanswered. From the vantage of the parent, where does the energy go that feeds the child's expansion? He keeps the reply within the bookkeeping of horizons. What crosses the boundary stays in the ledger of curvature. What buds is not a withdrawal, but a reclassification behind the screen. The accounts close properly. The child's fortunes begin on a separate page. He accepts this as a mannered reassurance. Paper over abyss. He pictures at last a collapsing heart as a seed with two destinies that do not argue. For neighbors, it becomes a quiet well that deepens the night and steadies orbits. For itself, it may, just may, open an interior sky that no exterior telescope can ever see. Both truths can coexist without trespass. The well and the cradle are the same posture viewed from different sides of the cloth. He finds peace in that ambiguity. He concludes only in tone, not in content. Baby universes whisper, if they whisper at all. They do not announce themselves with proof. They ask for a listening that respects both science and silence, both equations, extended with care and the restraint to let night be night. He stands with that listening, the way one stands on a winter field and imagines seeds beneath the frost, confident not because one knows which will sprout, but because one knows what patience can do. He imagines a pinch of space-time swelling like breath, the smallest hush becoming a wind that rearranges everything. Inflation enters this room with bare feet, not as a headline but as a pressure that smooths and widens. He holds the image of a field, not a meadow but a quiet quantity, spread everywhere like night air. In some regions the field perches high, on a gentle slope, storing energy the way a lake stores altitude. While it lingers there, space itself takes up the stored height and turns it into rapid widening, an expansion that proceeds without hurry in any local frame, yet covers enormous ground between distant markers. He feels the paradox of speed without haste, of calm that remakes horizons. He lets the field's potential be a landscape that no traveler walks with feet. Peaks are moments of restlessness. Plateaus are invitations to linger. If the field sits in a high shelf long enough, the shelf's energy acts like a steady hand on the fabric, pushing outward smoothly, doubling and doubling again with a rhythm that carries no sound. He does not count the doublings. He closes his eyes and hears only the low exhale that flattens wrinkles, irons temperature, spreads separate patches of sky into a single, shared weather. What looked like far edges becomes one room. What looked like a mismatched quilt becomes uniform cloth. He feels how this breath answers quiet puzzles. Why is the sky so nearly the same temperature in directions that, without inflation, would never have exchanged a greeting? Because before the breath they were close enough to sip from the same cup. After the breath they drift far apart, still warmed by their earlier conversation. Why is the geometry so nearly flat, as if triangles close with unremarkable sums? Because the breath stretches any curve until local angles forget their biases. He does not speak of miracles. He speaks of a well-timed smoothing, a patient iron run across creases formed when the universe was too young to hold them in mind. He lingers on the field's slow roll down its shelf. The slope is not steep. The descent is not a tumble. The field's inertia and the fabric's expansion conspire to keep the movement gentle, a poised reluctance that sustains the breath. Only when the shelf thins and the slope sharpens does the descent hasten, and the stored height converts into a vivid shower of particles and radiation, a reheating that writes the first bright sentences of the young sky. Before the shower, the world is like a held note. After, it is like a chorus learning its parts from scatter and glow. He lets quantum restlessness play at the edges. Even while the field rolls, it jitters, the way a still pond is never perfectly still. Small fluctuations ripple across the plateau and are pulled wide by the breath, stretched from minuscule to cosmic. He understands how the smallest whispers endure when magnified, how their relative loudness remains modest, but their scale becomes grand. Later, when the breath quiets and ordinary expansion resumes, those frozen ripples become seeds, places where gravity will gather, where gas will cool, where stars will kindle. He sees galaxies as fossils of a first whisper, spirals as calligraphy written by jitter, drawn thin and preserved. He softly considers the near-scale independence of those ripples, how their strengths change little across waves that span different lengths. The pattern resembles the even hand of a scribe copying line after line with patient pressure. Slight tilts in the script remain, clues to the shelf's slope and the field's pace as it rolled. He does not chase those clues into equations. He holds only that the cosmic microwave background, this afterglow cooled to radio hush, shows a mottled map whose freckles trace the field's restlessness and the breath's reach. Observation and whisper nod to each other across immense time. He wonders whether the breath can be heard in another way, as a faint swirl in the polarization of that afterglow, a curl that might carry the signature of ripples in space-time themselves, born when the breath was strongest. The curl is delicate, a rumor nestled among louder foregrounds, dust that glitters and confuses, lenses that twist light's orientation. He does not ask for a verdict tonight. He accepts the search as part of the listening. Instruments learning to separate wind in the leaves from a river far beyond the trees. He turns the image toward the question of gateways. If a collapse inside a horizon can nurture a region perched on a high shelf, could that interior patch begin its own breath, its inflation, while the parent world remains none the wiser? He does not insist. He lets the idea pass as a tide passes, beneath a dock, lifting what it can lift without uprooting anything. A bud that inflates quickly seals itself off, the narrow throat pinched by expansion into a closure that keeps parent and child courteous and separate. From within the child, the breath looks like a beginning. From without, the parent sees only a quiet well deepening. He touches the thought of perpetuation. If the field's shelf is broad enough and jitter is lively enough, some patches may linger, while others roll. Lingering patches keep breathing, birthing more space even as nearby regions finish and reheat. The result is a garden that never entirely stops growing, a mosaic in which flowering occurs here and there forever, each blossom a vast sky unaware of the gardener's larger pattern. He does not turn this into an empire of universes. He keeps it at the scale of a garden, tended by chance and law, without master plan, with patience as the principal tool. He hears the modest objections and welcomes them. What is the field? Why does its landscape have the right shelves? Are we reading the freckles correctly? Could other stories smooth as well or better, with fewer assumptions or gentler debts? He does not wave these away. He recognizes that every generous idea pays rent in precision. He values the rent more than the view. Ideas that stay must feed the household of observation and fit their furniture to the room. He listens to the way inflation, this breath, interacts with ethics, softly as metaphor. The breath asks a humility of initial conditions. Perhaps the world did not start perfect. Perhaps it learned composure by a period of practiced stillness. He is not prescribing serenity. He is noticing that even the universe may have needed a long exhale to become a place where complexity can arise without immediate contradiction. The breath is not an answer to longing. It is a stage set for later acts to play. He turns to a precise image, a small patch of the early fabric no larger than a grain of thought, smoothed by the breath until it is wider than any later horizon, could reassemble by communication. When the breath ends, the patch continues as all that is seen from a single vantage. Our visible sky becomes the interior of that once tiny region. He finds comfort in the notion that enormity can spring from modest beginnings when patience and steady pressure are present. He imagines the breath as a teacher of scale, showing how big and small can exchange roles when time and geometry cooperate. He remembers that the breath's end, the reheating, is not an explosion but a handing over, a conversion of stored quiet into lively variety. Fields decay, particles appear, interactions commence their intricate dance. The script shifts from a single long vowel to consonants and syllables, to chemistry, to stars. The seeds planted by jitter wake and grow. He feels how later landscapes, galaxies, clusters, filaments, are composed of condensation around faint outlines drawn during the breath. He thinks of frost following invisible veins in glass, the pattern not invented at the moment of freezing, but revealed. He allows for the possibility that the breath is supple enough to take more forms than one. Some shelves are wide and flat, others slope with character. Some whines last long, others exhale more briefly. The shared motif is smoothing without erasing, amplifying the quiet until it can host intricacy. He likes that motif. It carries restraint, rather than conquest, moderation rather than spectacle. If a gateway needs a first room on the other side, perhaps that room is this breath, a nursery where variation is fostered rather than dictated. He closes the meditation with the same air that opened it, a slow inhalation and an easy exhalation. Seeds of inflation remain seeds. Ideas that behave well under light and yet still ask for water and time. He keeps them near the earlier whispers of budding universes, not as proof, but as companionship. In his mind, the pinch of space-time inhales. The hush becomes a wind. The wind leaves a faint imprint of its currents on everything that will later shine. Whether this is the way beginnings prefer to arrive remains open. The openness, like the breath itself, is the point. He holds the idea of clocks without faces, instruments that keep time where hands cannot keep pace. Near a horizon, ordinary. Schemes for measuring before and after feel like sand poured into moving water. He senses how the light cones tilt, how possibilities rearrange. Far away, a second is a small bead on a steady string. Close in, beads slide, gather, and refuse to sit evenly. Past and future trade glances, not by changing who they are, but by changing who they can reach. He remembers that a clock is not numbers. On a dial. It is a regular change in a body. A swinging weight, a vibrating crystal, the oscillation of a field. Every clock is local. It knows only its own pace and the neighborhood's rules for relating that pace to others. Here the rules yield politely to curvature. A clock that hovers near the horizon ticks more slowly than its twin far away. The slowing is not feigned. It is the fabric's honest answer to weight felt as waiting. He pictures a wristwatch resting on a quiet rail near an abyss, its hand moving with all the conviction it has, while distant watches trace many laps in the same interval. Both are faithful. Faithfulness is frame. He places an imaginary elevator beside the edge, a small room released into free fall. Inside, weight drains from limbs. The body finds a soft neutrality. The clock in that room keeps its usual beat. It does not sense a fence in the sky. It does not shudder at an invisible border. It crosses what the distant world calls the horizon in a finite ordinary allotment of its own minutes. For the hovering observer, those same minutes stretch and thin until arrival appears to never quite happen. Two stories, both loyal, share the same world without sharing a common now. He lets that lack of a common now keep its quiet dignity. He contemplates the river picture, where space itself flows inward. Far from the whole, the current is slow. Nearer, the flow strengthens. At the horizon, the river moves inward at light's speed. Within, it outruns every swimmer. A clock carried by the current has no trouble telling itself what time it is. A clock moored against the flow endures strain, feeling spray and warmth that issue from insisting. The distinction is not a trick. It is the difference between yielding to the fabric's motion and denying it. He finds a kind of wisdom there, a physics of posture rather than of force. He lets coordinates pass through his attention like weather. Some charts insist that time stops at the horizon because their labels refuse to cross. He does not scold the charts. He notices instead how kinder labels step in, names that run with the flow, that grant the crossing its unremarkable continuity. In those names, the horizon is not a moment of time but a place in space, and beyond it the inward direction is not optional. Inside, what was once called radius becomes a sort of time. Shrinking is not a choice, but a future. He feels the grammar. Change tense without drama. A sentence that continues while the parts of speech rearrange. Past and future, in that rearrangement, trade glances. Outside, future means later by a clock that can linger above the well. Inside, future means a smaller radius by a clock that cannot help but fall. No traveler who has crossed can avoid meeting a region where the map runs out, where equations predict their own end or demand new letters. He does not decorate the meeting. He calls it simply the interior future, inevitable in the same way tomorrow is inevitable when walking a road that allows no side path. Determinism here feels like gravity. The absence of vertical footing is a law, not a punishment. He thinks of thermodynamic time, an arrow drawn by the statistic of many parts. Entropy grows, not by decree, but by probability in fields of myriad possibilities. A black hole has an entropy so large that its surface area stands as a measure of unfathomable arrangements. The arrow near the horizon points outward in a different sense. Radiation trickles away. Correlations spread. The ledger writes and rewrites. Yet for the infalling clock, the arrow points inward toward the singular future. Two arrows, both honest, neither contradicting the other within their own rooms. He honors the coexistence. He listens for other clocks the black hole provides, clocks without faces, made of the hole's own response to disturbance. A small nudge, a passing wave, a falling fragment, after each, the horizon and its neighborhood. Ring down with tones that fade, characteristic notes of the geometry itself. The world calls them quasi-normal modes. He hears them as the Wells chime, a signature that announces mass and spin the way a bell announces size and shape by sound alone. There is a time constant in that fading, set by the steepness of the well and the turn of the space around it. One can keep time by how quickly the chime grows quiet. He considers a subtler clock, how swiftly the horizon scrambles detail. Take a delicate pattern and toss it in. Wait until the outgoing glow begins to rhyme faintly with what was tossed. There is a time scale suggested by the hole's temperature and breadth, a patience measured in the log of how many stories the margin can hold. He does not say the number. He keeps only the poetry. The black hole is a fast forgetter in appearance and a fast mixer in truth, and mixing itself provides a tempo, a metronome in the dark. He returns to the old question of simultaneity. Who shares a now with whom? On Earth, the question is handled by wires and light pulses, by conventions that synchronize what cannot truly be universal. In the sky, between stars, simultaneity is as local as weather. Near a horizon, it becomes even more provincial. A line that seems horizontal on one map tilts on another. A moment shared by far and near loses crispness under gravity's hand. He does not lament the loss. He accepts that now is a promise kept in neighborhoods, not a treaty binding the whole. He sets an hourglass on a table in his mind. Grains slide from future to past, or so the idiom says. But perhaps the hourglass near a horizon works differently. The neck is a place where naming falters. Above the neck, one calls the heap to be future. Below, one calls the growing heap past. At the waist itself, the grains are neither, they are crossing. He suspects horizons may be the wastes of the world's hourglasses, regions where the language of before and after loses edges because the act of passing is the only fact that matters. The grain's honesty is to fall. The naming is our embroidery. He lingers on acceleration's warmth again, the unrue-like haze that greets a watcher who refuses to drift. That, too, is a clock. Temperature sets scale for fluctuation. Fluctuation sets cadence for change. The hovering observer lives among quanta that flip cards at a certain rate, a shuffle tuned by distance to the edge. The falling observer does not share that shuffle. Two clocks, two climates, two respectable ways of keeping pace. He feels in this an ethics of observation. Before asking what a thing is, ask from what seat it is being seen. He admits that inside the horizon, ordinary extension in space dissolves into a race against a kind of time measured in dwindling radius. There is no platform on which to pause, no stand to set a clock that refuses the flow. That impossibility is not cruelty. It is the geometry's way of saying that some questions, how long could one wait here, do not apply. He accepts that. Good questions are as local as good clocks. Where there is no staying, there is no waiting. Where there is only onward, time is simply the word for that onwardness. He thinks of the cosmic microwave background as another clock that does not need hands, a temperature that cools as the universe expands, a color that reddens in a measured way. If, within a budded elsewhere, a similar background appears, clocks there will be tied to that cooling, not to any agreement with the parent sky. Time is intrinsic, not imported. He feels the independence of regions as a kindness, the way a child keeps time by her own growth, not by the attic clock in a house she has never seen. He lets the section settle with a simple feeling. That. Near. A black hole. Time is less a river shared by all than a braid of currents, each honest within its strand, woven without a single surface to place a clock of clocks upon. Clocks without faces keep true by their behavior, by fading, by scrambling, by chime, by warmth, by fall. Past and future meet eyes at the threshold not to argue but to acknowledge that their meanings depend on who asks and where they stand. He allows that acknowledgement to be enough. The hour grows quiet. The beads on the string resume their steady slide, some near, some far, all governed by a fabric that keeps its rhythm even when the hands we build cannot follow. He listens for signals in the static, for patterns that rise from background like constellations on grainy film. He treats the static kindly. Noise is not an enemy. It is the sea that carries what matters. He imagines instruments as patient fishermen lowering fine nets into an ocean of fluctuations, waiting for the faint tug that says a distant event has sent a small truth their way. He considers a pair of long corridors crossed by light, arms held at right angles like open hands. Laser beams pace those corridors with monastic regularity, recombining in a pattern that prefers perfect balance. Then, for a breath no longer than a sigh, the pattern misaligns, not by human clumsiness but because the fabric itself has flexed. A ripple passes, space grows and shrinks with the tolerance of spider silk, and the light reports the change by a delicate shift that fades again. He understands how two such listeners, and then more, place a pattern on a map. Timing triangulates. A slight early arrival here, a slight late arrival there, and the sky narrows from a swath to a patch. Mass and spin, inclination and distance, speak through the curve of the chirp and the spacing of tones. He does not hunt numbers. He trusts the grammar of the waveform, the way crescendo and fade tell what collided and what remained. He attends to the last tone, the ring down, as the geometry's own voice, a bell struck by a merger and left to sing its identity while it quiets. In that fading, the doorway sketches itself. Not an image on a screen, but a contour in sound. A black hole is recognized by how it returns to calm, by how quickly the chime dies, by the proportions that govern its trembling. He turns to light, that grazes the brink and escapes with just enough energy to tell the tale. Radio dishes across Earth link their gazes, clocking themselves together until the planet becomes a single, slow blinking eye. The eye stares at the heart of a far galaxy and waits for a ring to resolve. A soft halo drawn by photons that loop, bend, and barely break free. It is a negative space portrait, center withheld, boundary revealed. He appreciates the craft. Atmosphere twitches, sources flicker, the Earth turns. The data arrive with gaps and moods. Algorithms become the last careful brush, not to invent, but to reconcile. recovering only what the geometry of the array could, in principle, have held. Closure phases keep the honesty, calibration becomes an ethics. The ring appears not because desire wills it, but because clocks and baselines have agreed to the same patient rhythm. He notes how polarization adds a deeper contour, a whirl in the light that hints at magnetic fields threading the near horizon. Plasma. The ring is not a simple rim, it is a dynamic embroidery. Brightness swelling here, dimming there, influenced by flow and spin, by lensing and Doppler sway. He lets the complexity breathe without cataloging it. The doorway remains a silhouette drawn by a storm, believable because many different eyes find the same curve. He thinks of other sketches. Stars near the center of our own galaxy tracing narrow ellipses, their speeds speaking of an unseen mass that refuses the scale of any ordinary star. Their paths are pen strokes around a well too deep for luminous stone. Each method, waves, rings, orbits, speaks the same soft sentence in different idioms. There is a region where gravity is so complete that escape, once too near, is no longer a verb. He lingers on the idea that observation is an art of inference, at the edge of resolution. Gravitational waves right in time, radio images right in space, stellar orbits right in both. None opens the door. All sketch the doorframe. He does not mind. A doorway does not need crossing to be known as a doorway. A keyhole shows enough of the room to keep the thought honest and the appetite tempered. He listens to the criticisms with a calm nod. Are the rings blurred by scattering? Are the models inside the algorithms too opinionated? Do the waveforms assume simplicity in systems that carry hidden complications? He allows the questions to sit beside the data. He trusts the long game, the way multiple measurements, seasons apart and methods apart, converge like rivers toward a delta of shared truth that grows sturdier with every tributary. He considers how signals of different kinds cooperate. A merger heard first as ripples can sometimes be seen later as fading afterglow in other bands of light. A tidal disruption might whisper in X-rays while a long radio echo writes years of script. Multi-messenger is the name given to this courtesy, but he thinks of it as harmony, different instruments agreeing on the key. Harmony does not open the door either. It only lays a carpet to its threshold. He admits that in all these sketches, the inside remains private. Observers build an outline they cannot cross. Yet he finds in that privacy a certain beauty. The universe allows knowledge of a boundary without granting trespass. Respect becomes a method. Not everything owed to curiosity is owed to entering. Sometimes it is owed to listening and to tracing with a careful hand until an honest silhouette stands by, itself. He asks a small question and lets it hang. If a black hole were a gateway, would any of these signals carry an accent of elsewhere? Would the ring sway differently? The waves ring down, hum in an unexpected tone? The orbits drift with a whisper of unanticipated law? He does not make such accents perform tonight. He notes only that the path to such discovery, if it exists, remains the same. Patient measurements, converging methods, humility about inference. He closes with gratitude to instruments that sleep lightly and wake for distant thunder, to arrays that knit continents into single eyes, to the static that tolerates our nets. Signals arrive as brief courtesies from events that finish long before their news is heard. The sketches they allow are enough to draw a door in the dark and to stand before it with reverence. He remains at that door, content with outline, and with the slow refinement of the drawing. He returns to the river and the boat, to an image modest enough to carry the hush of night. Space-time becomes a current. Motion becomes agreement with water. He does not force the metaphor to do more than it can. He lets it teach gently. A black hole is a reach of river that runs so swiftly inward that, at a certain pale line, the flow matches the best that any swimmer could manage. Beyond that line, the current outruns even light. He imagines a leaf set on the river far upstream. The leaf keeps faith with the flow. It drifts, not lazily, but obediently, following the straightest path the water defines. In the language of the fabric, the leaf traces a geodesic, the line that asks nothing extra of the body that follows it. In this understanding, falling is not a defeat, it is the shape of the world. The leaf spends nothing. The river carries, and the leaf agrees. He sets a small boat on the current. The boat carries oars and, if needed, a quiet engine. He calls these extras proper acceleration, the push a traveler gives himself that the river does not supply. Upstream of the horizon, the boat may row hard and hold position for a while, or even make slow progress outward. Every stroke spends fuel, spends patience, spends time. To hover is to labor, to fall is to rest. Near the line, the cost of hovering grows steep. He notices how the world rewards surrender to context with ease and punishes refusal with effort. This is not morality, it is geometry. A clock on the boat that rows against the flow ticks differently than a clock that drifts. Warmth licks the hull of those who insist on station keeping. Coolness greets those who let the water choose. He hears in this a lesson about frames that extends beyond rivers and holes. Drift and meet smoothness. Resist and meet spray. He brings light into the scene as a swimmer that can match the fastest flow but never surpass it. Downstream, the swimmer keeps pace with the near water. Upstream, outside the horizon, the same swimmer can still make headway, though increasingly slowly. On the line itself, an outward-aimed flash hangs in place, a fish flexing fins without changing its station. The picture stays precise without equations. He trusts the simplicity because it refuses to promise more than it can show. He imagines whirl in the current where rotation lives, the river not only descending, but twisting. Close to a rotating hole, the water drags every boat, leaf, and swimmer into turn. Even those who wish to face another way must pivot a little. The region where this insistence becomes inescapable behaves like an eddy with a boundary. Outside the eddy, a careful pilot can hold a bearing. Within, all bearings precess with the stream. Compulsory spin becomes a quiet climate rather than a crisis. He looks at the oars again. Proper acceleration is expensive, especially where the flow strengthens. A boat that begins far out can spend a lifetime of fuel holding one stretch of bank in view. Or it can ship oars, quiet the engine, and notice how calm the surface looks to those who travel with it. In free fall, the world near the boat resembles any world without gravity, at least for a time and within a small cabin. Difference reappears only when notes are compared. He thinks of energy like provisions stored in the boat. Paddling against the flow burns provisions quickly. Drifting conserves them. Yet drifting also carries the boat toward rapids that cannot be escaped once crossed. There is an ethics of choice here that belongs to physics alone. Spend fuel. 2. Linger in eddies, or accept the river's haste and learn what the throat looks like from within. Neither is superior. Each is a statement about what questions matter to the traveler. He allows himself to picture an oar dipped not to stop the fall but to steer with the current, angling for lines that use the water's own power. Even in a swift river there are lanes of sweet water where a small effort multiplies. Around a rotating well, such lines might borrow a little from the turn itself, like a mill that takes work from a stream without claiming to own the stream. He does not dwell. He keeps the thought as a soft suggestion that sometimes surrender and skill combine. He returns to the leaf because it is the simplest witness. The leaf does not narrate. It does not assign reason to its path. It floats. In doing so, it traces the clearest story the river offers. He sees in that clarity a reminder that the geodesic, The unforced path is both an economy and a truth. Force can change a path, but the unforced path reveals the map. To learn the river, watch the leaf and let the leaf's silence teach. He attends to what happens once the horizon is crossed. Inside, rowing outward is no longer a project. It is a misunderstanding. The very word outward loses meaning when the river's inwardness is not a direction, but a destiny. The boat's bow points any way it likes. The current carries every orientation toward the same shrinking measure. He imagines turning the rudder and feeling all responses reduced to swivels without translation. Skill remains, angles to trace, spins to respect, but the future is single. He thins the scenery to essentials: a distant bank, trees tilting with the flow, stones making low ribs under the surface. Quiet eddies form where rocks once were. Long tongues of smoothness hint where the bed drops away. Every river is a history written in water over stone. A black hole is water over the bedrock of space-time. To read it is to accept current as author and let inference do the reading. He closes by letting the boat drift without command. The oars rest, the engine quiets. The hull listens to the gentle knock of small waves. The leaf keeps company alongside, equal in honesty if not in equipment. Whether the river leads to a hidden lake, a fall, or a sea, no one has charted is not his to settle tonight. He is here to learn the grammar of flow and to feel how gates, if they exist, may be currents to be understood rather than doors to be forced. The river and the boat are enough for now. He follows fossils of fire across the dark, long embers written where nothing seems to burn. Jets leave their handwriting in the low light of radio maps, in filaments and lobes that blossom far from their source. He thinks of them as calligraphy carried by magnetic breath, strokes laid down by a quiet engine deep at a galaxy's heart, the lines continuing for ages after the hand that makes them rests. He stands, in thought, near that heart. A disk turns, thin and bright, its inner joinery threaded with fields that rise like hair in a storm. Rotation tangles with magnetism, tension stores, release chooses direction. Two narrow funnels gather, opposite and insistent, not of flame, but of ordered energy. Pointing flux braided with particles riding the twist. He does not choose a single mechanism to praise. He simply allows that spin and field, disk and horizon, conspire to draw straight lines in a curved universe. The lines begin needle-narrow, collimated by structure invisible to ordinary sight. Close to the source, they hold together like taut. Wires, carrying patterns that seem to outrun light though they do not. Only the bright knots, launched nearly toward the watcher, step ahead in appearance by the grace of perspective and delay. Farther out, shocks speak in beads, knots brighten and fade, and the jet wrestles gently with the medium it crosses. He reads this wrestling as history. The environment writes back, shaping the lane and the lobe. He listens for the voice of electrons spiraling through fields, a whisper called synchrotron. Broad, soft, faithful to curvature and speed. The whisper cools as the spirals spend their energy, and that cooling leaves a gradient, spectral aging, that tells how long since the last strong stirring. He likes the phrase itself, the last strong stirring. It turns a distant lobe into a clock without hands, a fossil whose colors map the time since fire. When shocks pass again, or turbulence reworks the broth, the spectrum freshens. The embers are warmed. A faded relic rises like a radio phoenix and glows once more. He pictures lobes as buoyant lanterns, bubbles of magnetized plasma lifting through the hot atmosphere of a cluster. X-ray gas gives way. Cavities appear. Rims brighten where displaced matter gathers. Ripples spread like sound on a pond, encircling the lantern with patient rings. Feedback is the technical word, but he prefers garden words: pruning, aeration, care. The lanterns keep central gas from cooling too quickly. They lift and mix and warm in drafts measured not in days but in eras that suit a galaxy's slow metabolism. He notices that jets have tempers. Some fade close to home into feathered plumes. Others keep a narrow defiance across enormous distances, and end in bright shocks where the stream meets resistance and flares. He does not sort them by letters tonight. He notices only that temperament records context, how much food the engine receives, how tight the field is wound, how patient the surrounding night. Morphology is memory in another tongue. He thinks of duty cycles, of engines that wake and rest. A galaxy's heart may write one long pair of strokes, grow quiet, then write again with a slightly altered hand. New jets carve paths through old lobes, fresh lines cross faded ink, palimpsests appear, layers of testimony to rhythms of fueling, to mergers and torques to tilts that drift over time. In clusters, ghost cavities drift like spent lanterns, their radio whisper sunk below easy hearing until a passing shock reheats the embers and makes old ink legible again. He notices precession, slow nods in the pointing that trace sinusoids, on the sky as if the quill holder writes while breathing. A companion may tug the axis. A stream of fresh gas may reorder the inner disk. A buried misalignment may unwind. The path remembers. Even absence writes, bends where the stream was deflected, gaps where the flow starved, flares where resistance turned to acceptance. He trusts polarization to play the archivist, revealing the lay of magnetic fibers across lobes and knots. Angles, swing, degrees deepen and lighten. A map of hidden threads appears. Faraday rotation adds a margin note from intervening plasma, turning the page of orientation with a twist that encodes density and field along the line of sight. The fossil of fire becomes a layered manuscript, ink and paper grain and room humidity, all legible if one reads with patience. He returns with care to the engine itself. A spinning horizon may donate some of its stored rotation to the jets through field lines that skim the edge and tap the twist. A disk may sling matter along steadfast lines like beads on taut strings, flinging it outward until the field lets go and the stream flies true. He does not adjudicate. He bows to the possibility that several courtesies cooperate. Horizon and disk, frame drag and pressure, geometry and plasma, each giving what the other needs to keep the stream aligned. He considers the ethics of all this writing on the larger canvas. Jets can starve or feed. They can heat reservoirs that would otherwise cool and quench the earliest buds of starlight, or they can compress drifting clouds and seed brief litters of stars along their path. In smaller systems, microquasars, miniature versions play the same grammar on time measured in days and weeks, offering parables in miniature. Scale changes, sentence structure remains. He wonders whether any accent of elsewhere would ever reveal itself through a jet's handwriting. If a black hole's interior buds a child region, the parent's jet still arises from the outskirts, disk and field and ergo region, well shy of the unshareable inside. No passport is stamped at the gate. Yet the jet may, by steadiness or pause, by sudden change of axis or diet, hint at deeper rearrangements near the core. He leaves the hint uncolored, content that most tales jets tell are domestic, local weather around a mysterious house. He pays attention to distance, to how far some fossils extend. Lobes larger than their host galaxies balloon into intergalactic fields, marking territories with long, faint light. Their rims blur where particles have cooled. Their centers may carry hotspots where energy still arrives. Inverse scattering adds a second voice, as old electrons kick background photons to higher pitch and let observers weigh the invisible by the glow of what would otherwise pass without notice. Fossils are generous like that. Even their silence informs. He imagines a future archaeologist of the sky reading these fire fossils as geologists read ancient lava flows. Orientation changes mark past tilts. Sharpness maps youth. Sagging rims and ghostly hollows map age. Cross-cutting lines establish a stratigraphy of events. Without numbers, a narrative still emerges. Here the engine was loud and steady. Here it faltered. Here a breeze from a merger bent the stream. Here echoes ring in hot gas from a burst that happened before his species opened its first radio eyes. He watches how jets carve not only space, but time. Light travel delays paint illusions of speed. Precession writes slow cursive. Duty cycles stamp. Dashes and pauses. Ringed ripples linger like punctuation in the cluster's bright fog. The script is legible because many alphabets agree. Radio and X-ray, polarization and pressure, shock and silence, each marking the same paragraph on the same page. He sets one more image in place, a canvas of darkness with faint symmetric wings. Each wing is not a creature but an imprint of flow made visible by magnetism and memory. The wings are fossils, yes, but they are also continuing exchanges, bubbles rising, fields relaxing, particles still drifting toward cooler colors. Fossil does not mean dead, it means written and kept. He lets the long embers glow in his attention a while longer. If gateways exist, their public signatures may be these side effects: the organized release of energy, the calm authority with which a spinning night writes on its surroundings without boasting of interior secrets. He honors that reserve. The fossils of fire teach patience. Read the margins of the sky. Trust that margins, once again, are where memory keeps its house. The jets finish their long strokes. The lobes dim by imperceptible degrees. The writing remains, legible to those who arrive softly and stay long enough to let the ink of radio night dry on their eyes. He turns to Earth, to the patient archive underfoot, and wonders how stone keeps a diary of distant thunder. The planet listens in ways slower than ears. It keeps counsel with basins and shelves, with ice that stacks winters, with clay that traps a season's dust and refuses to let it go. If gateways exist, their signatures on this side may be indirect, not portraits of what passes within, but echoes of nearby immensities and the habits of civilizations that briefly burn bright on a small shore. He kneels in imagination at a road cut, where layers present their quiet syllables. Sandstone rests on shale. A thin ash line crosses both, a sentence written in one wind. He remembers that only a portion of history survives. Ocean floor older than modest ages dives under continents and is rewritten as heat and new stone. What remains are fragments, shelves and deltas, deep-sea ooze that escapes the conveyor, caves where droplets keep time as rings of calcite. Absence is part of the text, a silence that still speaks. He lets the Silurian hypothesis arrive like a respectful question. If an industrial civilization had come and gone in deep time, what traces would persist for the curious patience of a later species to find? He holds possibilities without promotion, concentrations of metals beyond the comfort of ordinary crustal processes, synthetic molecules whose bonds nature rarely favors, isotopic tilts in carbon and nitrogen, written when engines burn ancient sunlight and fields feast on fixed air. Shards of plastic pressed into beach gravel until stone and polymer become one fabric, a plastiglomerate that future fingers could find smooth and strange. He watches how the present writes itself with unusual ink. Fly ash drifts like a gray snow. Aluminum gathers, though it prefers never to exist in pure form. Concrete spreads its artificial limestone, a lithology remembered rather than born at sea. Mid-century experiments leave atoms that sing outside ordinary geologic choirs, radionuclides that decline slowly enough to mark a page. Microfibers settle through lakes, pigments lodge where silt would otherwise be brown alone. The writing is unintentional and complete. The era signs its name even when the pen is denial. He asks what survives the long patience of burial. Plastics break and rejoin, darken, become ghost textures within rock. Metals migrate, alloy, forget their human shapes. Molecules invented in laboratories remain as faint signatures, halogens clinging where the usual organics prefer to let go. Even if forms fade, their ratios persist. Carbon's light and heavy siblings answer differently to a sudden release of fossil air. Nitrogen remembers the appetite of fertilizers. Sulfur keeps the hushed scent of coal long after smoke has left the sky. Memory turns from nouns to relationships and endures as proportion. He lets the question tilt toward thunder from the sky. Earth has heard nearby explosions. Ferrous dust from ancient supernovae settling in seafloor crusts, and quieter weather from our own galactic center, where past flares may have breathed bubbles into the halo. He imagines other signatures that might follow an outburst near a supermassive heart, subtle lifts in cosmic rays, rearrangements in the chemistry of high air, tiny patterns of new isotopes inked into ice as layers count years. He does not declare these certain. He holds them as courteous possibilities, like footprints that may or may not belong to thunder. He thinks of cosmogenic markers as earthbound echoes of storms, atoms born when cosmic rays knock at nitrogen, and oxygen with a bright knuckle. Their spikes in trees and ice feel like drumbeats. He wonders what a more distant, longer thunder would write. Perhaps not a spike, but a hush, a modulation stretched across centuries, a dimming or a shift that later readers could mistake for weather until the rhythm repeats enough to suggest an origin beyond clouds. Some voices are loud for a moment. Others keep time by altering the background with exquisite restraint. He imagines varves, thin annual sheets of lake mud, dark and light, winter and summer counted like rings. In some epochs the count is smooth, in others sudden clay marks landslide or flood. He sets beside them the slow drip of cave stone, the way a stalagmite keeps a chemical autobiography of rainfall and vegetation, pH, and dust. He understands that civilizations leave their breath in such archives whether or not they build pyramids. Combustion and clearing, mining and smelting, all translating into ions that later pebbles and shells will quietly record. He steps back, again to scale. Millions of years erase with the courtesy of wind and plate. Mountain belts lift and lose, basins open and seal. Cities, if they exist, become silt, then rock, then memory in a seam quarried by chance. What survives best are the simple and the patient, glassy spheres of impact, pollen trapped in peat, a ratio slightly wrong for what the climate alone would have chosen. He releases the appetite for monuments and trusts instead the humility of indices. A civilization's loudness may someday be read as a tilt in a curve, a faint, persistent deviation that refuses to be weather alone. He wonders whether gateways, if they alter nearby tides of gravity or fluxes of high energy, could ever nudge Earth's diary. A passing sternness in the galactic center might lighten or load the cosmic ray rain. A change in magnetic fields far away could refocus particles and shift auroral songs. He knows such speculations are long bridges over fog. He steps carefully and returns often to shore. Yet the idea comforts him. The planet's archive is not parochial. It listens to both campfires, the one its inhabitants build and the one that burns at the heart of the Milky Way. He visits the great unconformity in thought, that wide, quiet gap where time's pages seem torn out, where young sediment lies on much older stone with intervals missing between. The gap cautions the reader. If volumes can vanish, so can testimonies. Absence does not prove silence. It proves the vigor with which the world edits itself. Many questions about vanished seasons and possible guests will remain invitations rather than verdicts, as honest in their incompleteness as the cliff that displays them. He gazes at a core pulled from ocean mud, a slender column with colors like muted rainbows. Here, tiny shells record the temperature of surface waters in the tilt of their chemistry. Here, iron dust carries a memory of winds that once blew stronger. Here, soot marks ages of burning, some natural, some historical. He reads without hurry. He asks the core, without expecting an answer, whether it holds any rumor of earlier industry, any echo of a flare from the deep center of our own galaxy, any pattern that wavers in unison across seas and caves and trees. He turns to deserts and finds records there too. Dunes migrate and pause. Their crossbeds keep a ledger of prevailing winds. Sporadic floods sweep minerals from far mountains into fans that splay like open hands at the foot of ranges. Within those hands, rare earths and heavy metals sometimes concentrate by human desire. If desire is absent, nature still separates grains by weight and shape. He wonders whether such natural sorting might be mistaken for intent, and whether intent in deep time might be mistaken for nature. The caution pleases him. Read slowly, compare pages, let many witnesses speak. He lifts attention to the polar night where ice holds centuries in blue silence. Layers thicken and merge. Bubbles trap ancient air. Acidity rises and falls with distant volcanoes. Now and then, a brief bright event leaves a thin horizon of nitrate or dust. He imagines a longer pulse, gentle, persistent, sliding through those layers like a sustained note. Would anyone hear it if they did not already know the melody? Perhaps the ear must be trained by patience before the song of elsewhere becomes distinct from the hiss of snow. He returns to the hypothesis of predecessors and lets it rest open. If such a civilization lived and ended long before our days, Earth would keep much of what matters as trend rather than artifact. A sudden warming scribbled as a carbon excursion, an oxygen slump in a sea that grew tired, a horizon rich in metals that have little business together. If nothing like that appears, the silence is still informative. It tells the reader how loud one must be to remain audible after the editing of time. He closes this listening with the sense that archives, like horizons, are margins where translation happens. Rock translates weather. Ice translates solar moods. Sediment translates the sum of many small acts into a layer that can be touched. He respects the patience of these translators. Whether they someday reveal a prior chorus or continue to sing only our own, they teach a manner of attention. He keeps that manner near as the night grows slower. Ask gently, read slowly, and allow that even silence may be a sentence the planet. Writes on purpose, a pause that invites breath before the next line of stone. He practices an archaeology of the sky, treating light as pottery shards lifted carefully from darkness. Each shard carries a curve, a glaze, a faint thumbprint. None is the vessel itself. He does not hurry to glue pieces. He spreads them on felt and lets their edges suggest a shape. A spectrum is such a shard. Colors stretched thin into lines that darken or brighten where atoms drink or sing. Iron makes a narrow groove. Hydrogen paints wide, simple bands. Oxygen lays a greenish whisper in certain nebulae. The kiln is a star or a shock. The glaze is temperature, density, motion. He turns each fragment in thought until the fingerprint of its maker appears as a pattern of lines no thicker than a memory. He imagines a museum drawer labeled Redshift, full of shards whose glazes have drifted toward longer waves. Distance and expansion write themselves as color drift. Time lengthens the pitch. A shard from a far kiln looks warm not because the kiln cooled, but because the universe has stretched while the shard traveled. He accepts this as a mercy, the sky's own labeling system. He places shards by hue and finds that placement is also chronology, a modest triumph for those who cannot walk to the workshop where the vessel was fired. He turns to absorption, those dark notches where a star's light passes through cooler gas and leaves bites taken from its brightness. He thinks of them as fingerprints left by a thief who stole only attention. Sodium makes a twin nick. Calcium leaves a double tooth. Molecules in a planet's thin air carve combs of fine tines across a parent star. He sees how these combs tell, of winds and weather, of clouds that prefer certain heights, of the faint perfume of water or methane drifting in a high, translucent shell. Even planets become shards, recognized not by shape, but by the pattern they leave in borrowed light. He visits a mission as the opposite drawer, where the shards themselves shine. Shocked gas at a supernova's rim lays crimson and blue on the plate. A newborn star's cocoon scrawls in bright hydrogen with neon accents. An active nucleus writes hard, narrow lines that cut through radio whisper and X-ray hum. Nebular lines behave like glazes tested in many kilns. Their ratios reveal temperature the way certain hues reveal heat in iron left in coals. He trusts ratios more than brightness. Ratios stand when distance lies. He lays out stellar populations as fragments from different workshops. Old stars favor calm colors and narrow lines. Young ones keep wide shoulders in their spectra, as if still catching their breath from birth. Metallicity, his soft word for the presence of elements heavier than helium, acts like grit in clay. Too much, and the glaze changes. Too little, and the vessel looks sparse and raw. He reads the iron-to-hydrogen measure as a date stamp. He reads alpha elements as notes about how quickly a neighborhood formed its stars. A galaxy's disk becomes a long table of pottery from many centuries. Its bulge a cabinet of antique bowls grown dark and smooth. He thinks of the Lyman Alpha forest, a stand of narrow lines in the spectra of distant beacons, each line a cloud between lamp and observer, each cloud a tree ring in the cosmic web. He sees a woodcut of the universe's growth etched by hydrogen's small refusal to let all light pass untouched. The forest becomes both barrier and map, showing where filaments gather and where voids open like clearings. He accepts that reading this woodcut requires patience with noise and humility about models, but he also accepts that such patience wins small truths: the temperature of intergalactic air, the pace of reionization, the smoothness of primeval winds. He lifts another shard. Light echoes. A flash from a dying star scatters on dust years later, so that a new ring brightens on the sky, an afterimage painted on drifting grains. He marvels that time itself becomes geometry, that the echo maps a paraboloid in space measured by a delay in light. Ancient flares can be dated by the rings they still discover in nearby clouds, long after the kiln went cold. He suspects other echoes exist, of jets that once blazed, of central engines that dozed and woke, caught in reflection and released slowly, like a voice sung into a canyon and retrieved by the canyon's own shape. He considers gravitational, lensing as the conservator's trade. A mass between observer and kiln bends light like a glass of imperfect thickness, splitting a distant vessel into several images, each delayed by a different path. With enough patience, one can watch a supernova appear in one shard and then, months or years later, bloom in another. Those delays weigh the lens and date the space between. He handles these repeated images as tiles from a mosaic scattered by a quake. Restored, they reveal the original pattern and the quake's character in one careful act. He admires the method, because it honors both accident and law. He notices that some shards arrive as photons of impossible age, relic light from when the world first turned from fog to transparency. The afterglow maps itself in small temperature freckles, slight as the memory of a touch. Polarization curls whisper of ancient ripples that may or may not have been caught. Dust confuses. Clarity demands discipline. He lets the discipline be its own comfort. Even when a curl refuses to separate from foreground and wish, the attempt refines the ear that will listen next. He imagines spectroscopy as pottery class for the patient. Heat a tiny bead of meteor, watch lines flare, and learn its ingredients. Grind a star cluster's light into a composite and ask what mix of ages would reproduce the curve. Fit models born of atomic data and laboratory flame to the skies subdued. Glazes, then refuse to fall in love with any single fit. He keeps at hand the habit of cross-examination, measure with light, confirm with motion, check with dust. Archaeology of the sky, like archaeology of ground, distrusts singular proofs. It prefers consilience, the slow, mutual nodding of many small witnesses. He allows the thought that if a gateway alters what lies near it, the shards might show a faint accent. A lensing pattern that deviates from clean geometry by a whisper, an echo whose timing remembers a brief rearrangement in near-horizon space, a spectrum whose lines tilt with a cadence not of orbit but of something more difficult to name. He does not request such accents to perform. He notes that if they exist, they will not shout. They will arrive as mismatched glazes one cannot attribute, to dust alone, as delays that resist an ordinary mass map, as correlations too delicate to celebrate until many shards agree. He ends with the vessel restored only in mind. The pot never returns whole. The shards suffice. Light scattered across time and bent by neighbors still holds enough for a hand to feel the curve that once poured. He takes comfort in this incomplete wholeness. The sky will not yield interiors, but it yields margins, spectra, echoes, lenses, that, together, sketch a patient outline. He lays the last shard gently with the others and steps back. The imagined vessel seems almost to fit the space it once held. He refuses to glue. He lets the arrangement remain an invitation. A quiet promise that with more light, with more time, with more listening, the shape may sharpen, though the room beyond the vessel's lip will always be private. He considers cosmological natural selection, an idea that enters the room like a soft breeze through a half-open window. The thought is modest in posture and ambitious in scope. Universes might beget universes through black holes, and what is inherited is not matter or memory, but the quiet numbers that govern how matter and memory behave. If the numbers lean toward prolific star-making and frequent collapse, then many black holes arise, and with them perhaps many buds of elsewhere. Over long, uncounted generations, sets of numbers that yield more black holes become more common in the family of skies. The metaphor is not pushed. It is placed gently on the table, like a seed that might or might not sprout. He pictures a landscape of possibilities, not a literal terrain but a map of relations among constants, the weight of the electron, the strength of the forces, the narrow difference between a neutron's mood and a proton's. Each point on the map is a full recipe for a cosmos. Each recipe cooks stars to a greater or lesser degree, lets heavy elements gather with more or less generosity, and invites collapse with ease or with reluctance. In such a garden, some plots burst into blossom, others remain thin. The blooms are not flowers, but black holes, quiet blossoms that make no color and all gravity. He allows variation to be small and blind in this telling. When a collapsing core buds, the child's sky may inherit nearly all of the parent's script. But with a few letters tilted, a few punctuation marks moved, a cadence altered in ways the parent cannot foresee. Most changes, like most mutations, lead to fewer stars or shorter lives. Some changes lead to the quickness of fireworks but do not foster the slow simmer that breeds heavy elements and long, luminous stretches of time. A rarer set of changes. Lands near recipes that combine patience and fertility, fusion that fuels long-lived suns, chemistry that permits compounds to linger, gravity that gathers without crushing at once. He walks softly around the idea that such selection could explain why the constants seem tuned for complexity without appealing to intention. A cosmos that leans toward making black holes naturally neighbors, a cosmos that leans toward making the things that make black holes. Massive stars, clouds that cool, elements that can radiate away heat efficiently enough to collapse. The garden prefers what reproduces, and reproduction here means more gateways, not more observers. Yet the tastes of gateways and the needs of complexity may overlap. He lets that overlap sit without saying it must be large or small. He prefers the humility of perhaps. He touches the counter-thought. Selection for black holes is not obviously selection for life. He lets it remain untroubled by certainty. The constants that raise many massive stars may shorten gentle eras. The parameters that sanction frequent collapse may make galaxies garrulous but unstable. He imagines a compromise drawn not by choice, but by arithmetic. A balance where long-lived suns cohabit with brief giants, where heavy elements come in time for rocks to form and oceans to consider their shores, and where, in the end, enough mass gathers in enough places to pinch the fabric inward and write new horizons. He avoids the temptation to draft a scorecard, to judge this or that constant optimal. The map is too high-dimensional for a quick walk. The valleys and ridges run in directions that perception, born in one set of numbers, barely comprehends. Instead, he listens for qualitative whispers. When cooling is possible, clouds can contract. When nuclear thresholds sit where they do, carbon waits as a patient crossroad. When gravity's pull and quantum repulsion keep close company, stars, and as soft embers or as seeds of night. If the buds of new skies sprout only where such stories unfold, then the family remembers those regions of the map more than others. He brings the thought back to gateways without hurry. In this mood, a black hole is both a local well and a potential ancestral tree's new branch. The parent universe never sees the child. The bridge is courteous and private. Selection happens. Without committee, without envoy, without empire, only by whether a given script leads to more throats that open inward, away from any eye that could certify the lineage. He accepts the loneliness of that genealogy. It resembles the quiet of seeds dispersed beyond the horizon of a field. The parent field continues to ripple with wind. The seeds take root where they land, unseen, and the wind does not report back. He notices an ethics hidden in the analogy, not of choice, but of patience. If the family of skies is real and fecund, then the numbers in this room are not sacred, artifacts, but outcomes of a long, unobserved drift toward fertility. Gratitude shifts tone, not for a unique selection for us, but for the privilege of being woven in a place where empirical richness and existential hospitality happen to meet. The gratitude requires no worship. It prefers attentiveness. The right response to a hospitable house is to notice its quiet architecture. He entertains a further whisper. If parameters drift by small amounts at each budding, then the family of skies explores its landscape slowly, favoring neighborhoods where small steps do not break the grammar of stars. The result would be a clustering of related universes, cousins whose numbers differ only slightly, each breeding black holes with similar ease. Far from these clusters would live isolated recipes that make fireworks or deserts or brief flares, but produce few or no seeds. He does not assign meaning to the distribution. He takes comfort only in the thought that exploration can be generous without being efficient. He returns to observation's boundary with care. On this side of any horizon, one cannot see the family tree. One can see only the governing numbers of this sky and ask whether small changes would reduce the count of fertile wells. The question becomes an exercise in sensitivity. Would a slight shift here or there erase long-lived stars, stall heavy elements, foreclose collapse? He knows the answers will be mixed and uncertain, dependent on whole ecologies of processes. Cooling, lines in gas, transparency to radiation, the balance of pressure and gravity in newborn cores. The exercise remains valuable even when incomplete. It trains attention on the ways generosity emerges from constraint. He takes a slow breath and lets the anthropic mood drift by without fuss. One can say, with a hand turned upward, that this universe hosts observers because observers can only find themselves in such places. The statement is true and light. Natural selection among universes, if it acts, would add weight to the explanation without seeking a teleology. Where new skies bud frequently, the numbers that invite budding proliferate. Observers, if they sprout as side effects of those same numbers, merely discover themselves in the densest groves of the family tree. He sees no scandal in that coincidence. He sees only the steady impartiality with which selection, where it happens, ignores the wishes of what later emerges. He recognizes the humility demanded by speculation that cannot be tested directly. He makes a small bow to the discipline of inference. Seek signatures that might indirectly favor or disfavor the story, such as a cluster of near-critical parameters whose mutual balance looks like the edge of a basin in the landscape. He leaves the bow unadorned. He refuses triumph. He accepts that some questions are apprenticeship tools for attention rather than exams to pass. He thinks of fitness in this cosmos not as conquest, but as capacity to host cycles, to form stars, to allow them to write heavier alphabets, to gather those alphabets into rocks and atmospheres, to end luminous lives as wells that may bud. In a forest, fitness includes the way old trunks become soil. In a sky, it may include the way old stars become seeds. He finds the symmetry gentle. It carries no command beyond noticing. He returns to the opening breeze through the window. If cosmological natural selection is a sound idea, it would mean that what he is calling gateways are also cradles, and that the world prefers scripts that keep the lineage going. If the idea is not sound, the gateways remain what they already are in the more conservative telling: quiet wells, patient and private, with no duty beyond shaping the orbits of nearby light and the fates of collapsing cores. In either reading, the night keeps its poise, the numbers retain their mystery, curiosity stays welcome. He closes his attention with an image of orchards at dusk. Some trees carry heavy fruit, some bear little. Some have branches young and green. Some are old and quietly seeding the ground with what the wind will take. Whether the orchard is planned or wild is not known. He walks between the rows without counting, content to see that fruit exists at all, that seeds lie in the grass, and that wind continues. If black holes are gates, the orchard is their wider home. If selection is the gardener, it works without announcement. If there is no gardener, the wind still knows its way around the trees. He breathes the dusk and lets the question remain a kindly companion rather than a verdict. He unfolds maps into night and finds that the maps are not places but manners of seeing. A Penrose diagram enters like a square of paper gently creased. The infinities folded to fit on the table, the far brought near without distorting the logic of who can speak to whom. He likes that modesty. Not geography, but causality. Not distances, but relationships among light and events. In these maps, light always moves along 45-degree lines. Anything slower than light leans inside those angles. Anything faster has no place at all. The diagram is a compass for permission. He imagines laying one square down for a calm universe, a blank diamond where the top is a far future, the bottom a far past, the left and right edges the elsewhere of light that departs and never returns. Names arrive like small constellations in the corners. Future time-like infinity, where long-lived travelers end. Past time-like infinity, where long-lived beginnings rest. Future and past null infinities, where light itself departs and arrives. Spatial, infinity, where distances stretch without end. He does not push the names. He lets them sit like labels on jars that keep the pantry of reach in order. He invites into the square a well, and the diamond becomes stitched with new lines. A diagonal appears and refuses crossing from one side, an event horizon, drawn not as a wall, but as a boundary that states simply that all futures inside lead to a certain interior. Another line, angled differently, marks the place where the map ceases to follow the script, an interior limit that, in the sober classical telling, is a singularity, future and space-like, a place no clock can step past. Inside that wedge, toward. The center becomes a word for toward later, and the diagram shows it plainly. Every world line that survives inside bends inevitably toward that interior line. The map is gentle and firm at once. He remembers the fuller extension for a quiet, eternal whole, and sees how the square becomes a lattice of diamonds and wedges. Two exterior regions mirrored, a white hole region that is like a fountain in reverse, of the inward sink and the dark interior where futures end. Thin lines connect the exteriors, the sketch of a bridge that is there in the math, shy in the world, a corridor that closes before any traveler of ordinary patience can pass. The diagram makes legible in one page what words alone keep tangling. He considers how the diagram changes when the whole spins. The interior then carries more rooms, a horizon that is outer, another that is inner. A region where the river's twist becomes compulsory, an interior line where classical extension wavers. He refuses to make the square frantic with labels. He traces instead the moral that the map conveys. Rotation complicates permission, introduces new crossings of light cones, suggests possibilities, like emerging again, that prudence and deeper theorems often close when quantum weather and generic disturbance are admitted. The diagram is a teacher of humility. What ink allows, the world sometimes edits. He folds another paper for a universe that expands with a soft acceleration, a de Sitter square turned on its point. Here, horizons appear not because of any local, but because distant regions recede too quickly to exchange light. The diagram shows causal diamonds for observers, each diamond a private sky with edges that are not walls but limits of conversation. He admires the symmetry. Black holes and cosmic horizons share a grammar. Gates are not only holes in the ground, they are also the reach of a voice in a widening field. He lays beside it a drawing for a universe whose edges act like a reflective boundary, a place where light returns, a stage more like a walled garden than an endless plain. He thinks of anti-de Sitter space, where the boundary is timelike, where signals can leave and come back, where fields feel watched. He does not lecture the correspondence that pairs such a stage with a play at its edge. He only notices that maps with boundaries invite conversation between interior and margin, and that such conversation suits the earlier whisper about holography. He observes how conformal compactification, the gentle rescaling that tucks infinities into corners, protects angles and thus protects the truth about who can touch whom. Distances lie. Angles do not on these pages. The result is a cartography of possibility rather than of place. He feels in that a philosophy. Describe the permissions first, the geometry of yes and no, and let measurement follow later. He traces with a fingertip the causal diamond of a moment and a location, the set of events that can be reached from here by signals traveling no faster than light, and the set that can reach here. The diamond is small near a horizon, pinched by the inward tilt of light cones. It is wide in free space, generous in its invitations. He senses how ethical this measure can feel, how each seat in the universe comes with a different capacity to give and receive. The map does not moralize the difference. It simply reveals it with quiet honesty. He turns to cosmic censorship as a margin note written in careful hand. Singularities prefer curtains. In the diagram, this means the interior hard lines stay inside the wedge, hidden from the open sky by horizons. He does not insist the conjecture is a law. He respects it as a manner the world seems to favor when disturbed and made real. Stronger versions whisper that the future ought not be extendable in ways that break determinism on any open set. Weaker versions settle for hiding indecency behind a veil. The map, for all its reserve, keeps these questions company in the way a clean diagram can, by making the puzzle's contours visible without taking sides. He notices how topological censorship appears as another margin note. Under broad kindnesses in the matter that fills the world, causal curves that begin far away and return far away cannot sample handles and shortcuts seen from infinity. The map thus conceals complexity, or rather, declares it domesticated. Bridges may exist as private identifications, but exposed conduits for travelers are disallowed by the oath the world swears to causality. He lets the oath be a lullaby for patience rather than a prohibition for dream. He attends to the discipline the map demands. Vertical is time-like, horizontal is space-like. Diagonal at 45 degrees is light's path. Horizon lines are the lines that separate the outside from the inward destinies. Singular lines are lines where the story ends in the chosen chart. Yet the chart is only a chart. Coordinates that misbehave at boundaries can be traded for coordinates that glide. The diagram's gift is to expose those trades gently. Once rescaled and refolded, the shyness of horizons becomes social. The mischief of infinities becomes manageable corners with names. He lets the notion of a Penrose diagram for an evaporating whole hover. The horizon shrinks. The interior wedge changes. The end mutters hints of what quantum gravity must finally say. The page becomes a living sheet. The triangle pinches. The future of a small hole differs from the eternal square. He does not draw the end. He accepts that any finite diagram keeps some secrets off paper, as any map of a coastline leaves unmapped, inlets that later tides will reveal. He returns the map to the night and reflects on gateways. A stitch between regions is easy to draw on paper. It is expensive in the world. Identifications that look like roads in the diagram may be better read as kinships of causality, a pairing of corners more than a passage one can walk. If black, holes are gates. The maps suggest that the gate is not a portal in the traveler's sense, but a declaration of how futures are reorganized. Inside later means inward. Outside later means outward. The fold changes grammar, not merely address. He closes the square and slides it back onto the shelf in his mind. Maps folded into night do something quiet and precious. They let attention hold the whole life of a space-time in one gaze. Not the texture, not the distances, but the permissions, the invitations, the refusals. A map that honors light's constancy, and the humility of local clocks becomes a meditation object. He sits with it the way one sits with a simple bowl, admiring how its rim tells more about capacity than any ornament could. The bowl need not be filled tonight. It needs only to be held, and to remind him that even the largest questions can fit on a small page when one chooses the right scale. He pauses at the horizon and asks a quieter question. How should curiosity behave when certainty cannot follow? The black hole offers no handhold, no permission to look within by simply looking harder. It sets a limit that is not angry, only absolute. He treats that limit as instruction more than denial. Ethics at the horizon begins, for him, as a style of listening, slow, careful, grateful, willing to be changed by what cannot be crossed. He considers the impulse to force a door. In laboratories and deserts, metals are bent and fields are coaxed, not to conquer but to clarify. Yet a horizon is not a lock. It is the shape of permission itself. He imagines the difference between a gate in a fence and a bend in a river. One may be opened by will, the other must be respected as flow. Ethics in this room resembles good navigation. Trim sail to current. Don't cut new channels when the old channels are the river's sentence. He thinks of knowledge as a compact, with consequence. To listen for waves and rings is to spend resources, to place machines on mountains and in valleys, to ask communities and species to invest. The choice of where to point attention is never neutral. He keeps the balance soft in his mind. The night deserves eyes. The earth deserves rest. An ethical astronomy is a choreography. Dark skies kept dark, radio quiet kept quiet, questions asked with a humility that remembers neighbors, human and more than human, who share the mountain and the air. He notices another kind of neighbor, future readers. Archives of data require care. Calibration needs honesty. Algorithms need modesty. He remembers that a ring on a distant sky emerges from clocks agreeing across continents and from minds agreeing about what to remove and what to keep. The ethical demand is simple and hard. Do not love the picture so much that you fail the truth. Better a faint outline honestly won than a vivid door conjured by wish. He lingers on metaphors because metaphors can wound or heal. Calling a black hole a void invites despair. Calling it a door invites haste. He prefers to call it a posture, the fabric bowing so completely that inward and later are the same word. He suspects ethical language should resist spectacle. The cosmos rarely shouts. The mind should not shout on its behalf. He chooses tenderness for words as practice for tenderness toward things. He considers risk and rumor. When new machines begin, some whisper fear. Could a collider make a seed of night? He acknowledges the whisper without ridicule. Ethics listens first. Then patience answers. Models, checks, prior evidence. The world's stubborn refusal to grant. Catastrophe to reasonable tests. He sees in that exchange a pattern worthy of keeping. Welcome the question, honor the fear, follow the thread to calculation, and only then, when the house of reasons is built, sit down within it. He turns to the ethics of inheritance. If black holes are cradles of elsewhere, if constants whisper across generations of skies, what duty arises for the brief observers in this room? None, perhaps, beyond gratitude. Yet gratitude can be muscular. It becomes care for the only world, available, the only shore from which to launch listening. Stewardship is not small because the cosmos is large. It is large because the cosmos is indifferent. Ethics, therefore, is local and immense at once. He asks whether there is an ethics of enough. Telescopes grow, arrays multiply, data swell. At what point does a new instrument learn little more than patience would, at greater cost to places that could have stayed dark? He does not answer with a number. He lets the question keep him cautious. The night will outlast every project. The mountain will keep its snow or not. The communities who live below will measure the price differently than those who visit for sky. Ethics invites more than one clock into the room. He breathes with the paradox of access. A horizon forbids entry and guarantees privacy. He hears, faintly, the comfort in that guarantee. Not all depths are for everyone all the time. Some knowledge is gained by approaching, some by staying back, some by acknowledging that no stance will deliver what the appetite wants. The appetite, then, becomes part of what is trained. He suspects this training, this softening of insistence, is one of science's hidden virtues when it is practiced well. He considers the ethics of speculation. Wonder is welcome. Inflation of stories is not. To speak of baby universes and bridges is to walk a narrow path between invitation and inflation. The rule he chooses is the rule of margins. Label clearly what the data draw, what the equations extend, and what the imagination offers as companionship for sleep. Do not let the companionship pretend to be the data. A horizon between report and reverie is a horizon worth respecting. He feels the weight of representation. When sky is made public, images, press, lessons for children, do the words honor difficulty without making doors sound easy? Do they include the hands that made the listening possible, across languages and nations and crafts? Do they keep faith with the quiet? An ethical telling, he believes, keeps spectacle small and wonder large. It offers silence as content, not merely as a background. He lets the horizon become a teacher for other rooms. Consent resembles a horizon, a boundary that is not a provocation but a fact. The right response is not to test it, but to learn its grammar, to see how much richness lies on the permitted side. The metaphor keeps him careful with all edges, ecological, personal, cultural. Where entry is not offered, listening may still reveal patterns that are enough. He entertains a delicate thought about intervention. If someday engines carry small watchers into close orbit around a massive well, what is owed to that environment? It is not alive in the way forests are alive, yet it holds structure and stability that may span longer than any living thing can count. He leans toward a leave no trace that is more than sentiment. Keep orbits clean, keep transmissions sparse, keep literal and figurative noise low. The night may be indifferent, but care is the trait he brings to interstellar company. He remembers that many traditions have looked at the same sky and carried it home in different vessels: story, ceremony, geometry, song. Ethics at the horizon includes deference to that plurality. A telescope on a sacred mountain is not merely metal. It is a choice that requires more than legal clarity. He holds this not to halt curiosity, but to yoke it to listening. The sky will wait. A good question can wait with it until consent and context are clear. He contemplates failure and confession. When a signal is misread, when a pipeline brightens, noise into false certainty. When eagerness outruns caution, the ethical move is not silence but repair. Tell the truth. Retract the door drawn where only shadow stood. Keep friendship with error as teacher, not as shame. The horizon does not punish those who misname it. It simply remains itself. He finds mercy in that, and a model. He brings the meditation back to the single act most available to anyone: attention. Attention is ethical when it is generous, when it does not hurry, when it honors context and cost. At a black hole, attention cannot push past the edge. It must learn the art of inference and the grace of not knowing. Perhaps that is the oldest lesson of night: to look long, to name little, to love the outline, to leave the center alone. He accepts the lesson as a kindness. He concludes this section not with a rule, but with a posture. At the horizon, curiosity stands with open hands. It asks softly. It calibrates itself. It keeps time with breath. It does not call privacy a challenge. It calls it a shape. If a gate exists, ethics asks not how to force it, but how to be worthy of standing here at all. He lingers in that worthiness, which is not achievement but demeanor, and lets the edge do what edges do. Hold both sides with care while permitting only what keeps both whole. He listens for the gate as one listens for rain before a storm is visible, with a patience that does not measure itself. Listening, here, is not an act of ears alone. It is a posture of attention toward the night, a willingness to let thinking grow quiet enough that the smallest reliable signals can surface. He stands in that posture, not pressing, not pleading, accepting that some doors, if door is even the right word, open only to the quality of the attention brought to them. He imagines listening as a circle with many instruments at its rim. There are the long arms of interferometers, keeping vigil for a tremor that speaks of distant joining. There are radio eyes braided into a single gaze, waiting for a ring to sharpen on a horizon's edge. There are telescopes that weigh orbits. Quieter still, counting years as nearby stars trace narrow curves around a mass that refuses a face. There is geology, too, holding its own counsel. Ice and mud and cavestone, teaching how the planet receives whispers from above and within. And there is the mathematics itself, which he treats as a kind of bell. When rung with the right assumptions, it yields tones that say which futures are permitted, which passages are poems, which borders are invitations, and which are the river's own grammar written down. Listening for the gate means allowing each instrument to remain itself. No bell becomes a trumpet by wanting to. No core sample becomes a sky map by ambition. He suspects that many confusions arise when one kind of listening is asked to speak in another's voice. He gives every method the courtesy of its native language and lets the harmony emerge where it will. Where no harmony comes, he does not force a chord. Silence is a note, too. He attends to a quieter instrument still, the moral ear. The night is indifferent, but inquiry is not. To listen well is to ask without trespass, to calibrate honesty as carefully as sensitivity, to remember that knowledge gathers in communities and that communities live under the same sky as instruments do. He holds this ear close because impatience is the quickest way to hear what one wants. Respect slows the pulse and makes room for what is actually there. He looks again at the word gate and notices how heavy it is with desire. A gate promises passage. A gate promises change of scene. But a horizon is not a hinge. It is a shape of allowance. If gates exist, they may be gates of description rather than travel. Gates that rearrange what later means. Gates that let memory cross languages without leaving its country. He allows the word to become lighter, more like threshold, more like margin, where the world writes its vows in thin strokes and keeps them. He thinks about thresholds that sound like beginnings but are really changes of alphabet. A black hole is such a place. Inward and onward become one. Surface remembers volume. Heat becomes a cipher for history. Local smoothness lives beside global bookkeeping. If a gate exists here, perhaps it opens on the recognition that relation is the first fact, that the inside and outside are entwined in a way that refuses ordinary geography. He does not claim to see through. He claims only to see how the outline refuses to be merely absence. He returns softly to the seed image that has kept him company. Seeds do not invite inspection while they are becoming. They ask for darkness, pressure, time, a set of conditions under which their interior changes name. A collapsing heart has some of that privacy. If a child sky begins within, it is a beginning that does not offer proof to the old world. The parent knows only the weight that remains and the silence that follows. Listening for such a gate is a discipline of accepting that some evidence is structural, consistency where contradiction would have been seen, completeness in the ledger where loss was feared, patient agreement among instruments that do not speak to each other except through what is. He watches his breath because it is the smallest cosmos he can attend. Inhalation is invitation. Exhalation is consent. Between them lies a pause that is not empty. He imagines horizons as that pause, edges where exchange is subtle and time changes gait. If he can keep breath slow, he suspects his questions grow lighter, and lighter questions sometimes fit through smaller openings. He does not push this into method. He keeps it as demeanor. He asks only gentle questions now. If there are baby universes, do they need acknowledgement from the parent to be real? If parameters drift between generations, is drift itself the gate, the only motion that matters? If selection favors throats that open onto elsewhere, does it also favor conditions that make long, quiet eras where complexity can rise without frenzy? None of these questions ask for conclusion. They ask to be lived with, like lights far on a winter shore that one keeps in view while walking, not to arrive at them, but to keep one's line true. He hears a familiar moth at the window, of thought, the one that taps when metaphors overreach. He lets it in for a moment and watches its small powder on the glass. He does not promise that black holes are doors in the storybook sense. He does not abolish the rule that says a traveler cannot return with news from the other side. He says only that the world's quietest arithmetic leaves room for kinships the eye cannot travel, that attention to margins has a way of revealing wholes, and that patience is not a lesser tool beside proof, but a different tool entirely. Often the only one allowed in certain rooms. He considers that listening for the gate may also be listening for the limits of listening. A threshold that cannot be crossed is still a teacher. It trains how to infer without invention, how to admit the existence of private interiors without filling them with wish. It invites a certain tenderness toward not knowing, a tenderness that paradoxically protects knowledge from becoming a brittle idol. He treasures that paradox the way one treasures a hand-me-down bowl, worn, simple, holding more meals than any one guest could count. He visits the orchard again in his mind at dusk and listens not to fruit falling, not to branches creaking, but to the wind among leaves. The wind is causality's cousin, the rule that says who can touch whom, who can send, and who can receive. Gates in that orchard are where wind can pass and where it cannot. Some trees are sheltered, some are open to every weather. He feels no urge to climb the fence. He walks the rows with slow steps and lets the air tell him where the hollows and eddies are. The map in his pulse becomes enough. He lets images fade until only texture remains. A ring seen from a world away, a chime returning to quiet after a merger, a disk turning and writing thin lines into darkness, a diagram folded small enough to fit in a pocket, a core sample striped with seasons, a breath measured against a window's cool. The question remains, could black holes be gateways to other universes? He leaves the could where it belongs, in possibility's open hand, not in proof's clenched fist. The gate, if it exists, answers only to humility and time. He closes without closing. He does not seal the door of thought, and he does not step through it. He stands before it in good company, instruments, stones, equations, and a silence that does not mind being named silence. Listening continues after. Words stop. The night is long, but it is not empty. He offers that as the last small gift of attention, that to listen is already to begin crossing, not into elsewhere, but into a finer presence with here. If a gate someday reveals itself, he hopes his listening will be soft enough to notice, and soft enough, too, to accept that noticing may be all that is ever asked of him. He leaves the heavy instruments on their mounts and keeps only a small vessel in hand, a bowl of attention, unornamented, holding stillness the way a pond holds moonlight. In that bowl, the question remains, the same slow ember he has carried through long rooms, yet it glows differently when surrounded by fewer names. The ember asks without leaning forward, could the black hole be a gateway, and if so, what is it that passes? He does not answer. He lets the bowl reflect the ember back to itself until reflection and flame become nearly the same gesture. He studies how thresholds appear in ordinary weather. Frost draws a clean edge on a window and then retreats by degrees. Shorebirds print a stitched line along the tide and erase it with the next set of breaths. Between day and night, the sky does not jump. It loosens. He recognizes in these softenings the same grammar that horizons prefer. Boundaries become manners before they become lines. If a gate exists in the heart of a well, perhaps it also behaves like dusk, an exchange of qualities more than a clack of hinges. He brings the smallest scales into the room without fanfare. There is a limit below which measurement begins to resemble disturbance more than description. The fabric, asked too sharply, answers by becoming many answers at once. Quanta do not refuse, they qualify. In this quiet, he sees a kinship between grain and curve, between jitter and bow. The inward pinch that writes a horizon may be a choreography of such qualifications, many small perhapses overlapping until the macroscopic sentence reads as certainty. He does not attempt to write the choreography. He trusts that the taste of it, uncertainty becoming structure, is enough. He considers language as a kind of gravity. Words gather around meanings and bend nearby thoughts toward them. The phrase other universe brings a certain pull that can distort unguarded images. He chooses lighter words, elsewhere interior sky, bud, child room. These bend less, they allow nuances to orbit without capture. He wonders if theory, too, requires such lexical humility. Terms that hold shape but not rigidity, names that keep possibility open without dissolving into fog. The right weight of word, like the right weight of mass, shapes a space where motion can be clear without being forced. He lets mathematics speak in the background like a steady drum behind a chant. Equations, in their austere kindness, draw out what must be true if certain quiet promises are kept, that energy follows its bookkeeping, that signals respect light's speed, that geometry listens to what moves within it. Within those promises, some drawings of throats and buds feel almost inevitable, solutions waiting not for consent but for context. He holds this inevitability loosely. A possible bridge on paper may remain shy in the world. A bud permitted by grammar may need ingredients that nature rarely lays out on the same table. Possibility is not probability. Permission is not occurrence. The distinction reassures more than it disappoints. He turns to patience as method, not virtue. Seas write continents slowly. Starlight teaches in centuries and in milliseconds both. A black hole's ledger updates with a pace that makes even mountains seem quick. Patience is the right unit for listening where gates are rumored. It tunes the ear to harmonics too faint for appetite. It softens the interpreter's will to impose symmetry where asymmetry is truth. Patience keeps a room ready longer than desire alone could. In that preparedness, new patterns sometimes appear without being summoned. He sees attention as a field with its own conservation law. What is held lightly returns. What is gripped too hard shatters into shards of certainty that cut the question to pieces. He keeps the question whole by not enclosing it fully. This is not vagueness, it is stewardship. A seed cannot sprout if pressed flat. A doorway cannot remain doorway if he fills it with furniture. He practices leaving the frame uncluttered so that whatever is permitted to move through, whether answer or new form of wondering, can pass without catching on unnecessary edges. He walks the gallery of images he has allowed, the river and the boat, the moth at the window, the seed under snow, the ring around absence, the bell that announces mass by the way it fades. None is the thing, all are instruments, tuned to human, hands, fit for a night like this. He does not rank them, he lets them form a soft consortium, each correcting the other's excesses. Where the river might tempt resignation, the seed reminds of interior work. Where the ring might tempt spectacle, the ledger whispers of quiet accounting. Where the bell might tempt finality, the moth taps for gentleness in metaphor. Balance is a way of remaining true when truth is larger than any one picture can hold. He tests a final, smaller image, almost empty of story, a line of faint light seen through mist across a lake. The line is real and fragile. A breeze can erase it. Yet it guides a step taken in the right direction, not to the far shore, which remains elsewhere, but to the next stone in the shallows. He suspects that is all a gate offers in many rooms. A vector of attention, a direction that becomes trustworthy by being walked, not because the destination has been promised. He accepts that walking may be all that is asked. He listens for the world's refusal, too, because refusal is information. Some questions never gather evidence sufficient for promotion from dream to model. Some models stand beautifully and never meet the sky. Some experiments ask more of a mountain than the mountain should give. Each refusal refines the shape of the acceptable and makes later patients more intelligent. A black hole's edge, by refusing entry, helps define the space of honorable inference. Desire learns to fold its hands there and to grow articulate in description instead of theatrical in claim. He imagines, cautiously, the possibility that gateways, if real, are not exceptional but ordinary. Ordinary, the way horizons and tides are ordinary, indicative of a larger pattern in which privacy and generation are linked. Then the wonder is not that a door exists, but that description can lay its palm on the grain of that door and feel the pattern without splinters. He sets that thought down before it becomes proud. Ordinary miracles prefer not to be named miracles at all. They prefer to be recognized by the care one must take to notice them. He lets silence reclaim the middle of the room and discovers a small surplus there, as if quiet, once invited, brings a gift. The gift is simple. Room enough for both hope and restraint to sit without crowding each other. Hope keeps the ear turned toward faint bells from distant mergers. Restraint keeps the hand off levers it has not yet earned the right to touch. Between them, listening rises to the level of practice instead of posture, a craft, humble and exact, that can be taught and learned and shared. He holds the first question one last time, not to press it, but to feel its temperature. It is cooler, now steadier, like a stone warmed earlier and set in shade. Could black holes be gateways to other universes? Perhaps. The stone does not say yes or no. It says, "Hold me a little longer. Feel how well I keep a trace of day for use at night." He interprets this as instruction. Keep the trace, carry it through the quiet, lend it to the next room where breathing slows and thought leans toward sleep. The question was never a door to rush. It was always a light to carry. Small, sufficient, undemanding. He sets the bowl of attention on a low table in the mind's dim house. The ember remains, barely visible, more warmth than glow. The room around it breathes. No maps shuffle on the shelf. No instruments stir. He does not close anything. He lets night keep its rules, its privacy, its patience. If a gate is there, it is already in harmony with this calm. If it is not there, the calm remains worth everything. He stays in that recognition until staying becomes simple. Until the bowl, the ember, the table, the room, and the breath are not separate artifacts but a single, quiet posture toward a sky that does not need names to be kind. He slows the room until it almost does not move. Air enters and leaves as a tide he keeps without effort. Somewhere a window cools the skin of night. Somewhere a dim current folds the dark into softer dark. He does not look for shapes now. He allows the world to be texture alone. The grain of silence, the faint hush between distant sounds, the uncarved patience of an unlit sky. He stands beside a shoreline that may be river or sea. It does not matter. Water continues its quiet practice against stone, and the mind follows, rounding its edges without thought. Above, stars rest like salt scattered on black cloth. They neither declare nor withhold. They simply keep their places, and keeping is enough. Breath remains. In, and the field opens. Out, and the field stays open. Between, a small pause holds. The weight of nothing and feels full. He lets that pause lengthen by a heartbeat, then another, as though time itself prefers a gentle ladder over a clock. Cloud or drift of mist slips by the unseen horizon. A single leaf turns once in air and is gone to its own resting. Far off, a low tone that might be wind or might be memory rises and falls without arriving anywhere. He notices the evenness of it and chooses not to name it again. He allows the edges of thought to soften as if chalk lines meet dew. Ideas that once asked for attention now seat themselves and close their eyes. The body follows, heavy and harmless, as a stone warmed all day by sun lets go of its heat and settles into the night. He carries nothing forward. He leaves the door unknocked, the maps folded, the instruments sleeping in their cases. Only breath. Continues, patient and round. The sky holds. The water keeps its small agreements with shore. Silence deepens but does not empty. He stands with it until standing becomes resting, and resting becomes sleep. End of script. Sleep well.